With the start of the new year comes the Lunar New Year, a holiday for families. On this day, families come together, cook delicious food, and have a good time. But 32-year-old Jiahan isn't happy. She is an out-of-work freelancer, but most would say that she is unemployed. As she is cooking for the guests who have yet to arrive, her mother is watching a cute video of her grandson. But Jia is irritated that they are getting in her way and eating the food she cooked before everyone arrives. When she suggests that her parents should cook the food since they are eating it, Jia's mother reminds her that cooking is the least she could do since she lives at home and doesn't even pay rent. Jia's sister, Jimin, arrives with her family and her mother embraces her granddaughter. Jimin's husband is carrying the grandson and Jimin is exhausted from the trip and wants to sit down. Jia appears out of the shadows to greet her little sister. With an almost fake smile, Jia says she is happy to see her and hands her a flower print apron. Jimin responds by noting that the apron looks great on Jia and mocks her relationship status by saying all she needs to do now is walk down the aisle. But Jia doesn't find the joke funny. She insists Jimin puts on the apron to help her cook with a lifeless expression. Jia's mom is not impressed and hits her. Jia just wants someone else to cook. But Jimin's husband points out that Jimin is tired enough as is, suggesting she is pregnant with a third child. This is big news for the family and they start eating. Soon after, Jia is outside smoking and angry at her sister for her life and suggesting she meet with a guy she knows. Jia's sulking is interrupted by an unknown man who comments on Jia still having a foul mouth. This man is eating chicken breast in a smoking area, which confuses Jia. The man reveals that his name is Mincheol Jin and that he used to live next door and wear headphones a lot. Jia initially doesn't remember him, but then realizes that he used to be a scrawny gamer kid. Mincheol didn't think he changed that much though. But Jia insists that he changed a lot and notes that him eating chicken breast in a smoking area is strange. Mincheol explains he is here because his family wasn't happy with him not eating the Lunar New Year food because they had too many calories. Jia recalls that Mincheol is 32 years old, just like her. They used to live in the same building and were childhood friends, but not by choice. Mincheol was the shy kid that didn't get along with anyone in class. But Jia doesn't see the point in reminiscing and is wondering how Mincheol changed so much. She concludes that the city life changed him, and he is now an assistant manager programmer at a well-known company and seems to live a decent life. Jia compares Mincheol to her life, where she constantly gets scolded at home and is unemployed, and is shocked that Mincheol is doing better than her. She starts to sulk again, but Mincheol interrupts her and asks how she is doing. Jia deflects the question and Mincheol says that he's just been living and while he thinks he's doing great, his parents think otherwise. His parents have been nagging him to get married and even signed up for a dating service with a registration fee of $5,000. Mincheol assumes Jia isn't in the same situation, but she is. Then, Jia suggests that they get married. Mincheol is shocked and Jia explains that since their parents are nagging them to get married, they should just get married to fix the problem. It would be a win-win scenario. To Jia's surprise, Mincheol asks Jia's dad for his blessing and they get married. They go to a tropical location for their honeymoon, and while she is drinking on the first night of her honeymoon, she finally realizes what just happened. She is shocked that she's not in a dream and is in another country married to Mincheol. Jia and Mincheol are now getting ready for bed and Mincheol is searching through his suitcase for something that would make their first night together good. Jia assumes that he is talking about something dirty and gets embarrassed, saying she is not ready. To her surprise, Mincheol hands her earplugs. He says that sometimes he snores and then goes to sleep. When Mincheol starts snoring, Jia uses the earplugs and goes to sleep, noting that Mincheol is very practical and prepared. The next day, Jia is concerned that her happy honeymoon can be disastrous if they start fighting. As Jia is carefully choosing her clothes, Mincheol appears in unfashionable but comfortable clothing and asks how much longer Jia is going to take. He is even wearing socks with sandals. Mincheol asks if it matters and Jia says it does because she will be looking. Since their schedule isn't tight, they go clothes shopping. While Jia doesn't know much about fashion, she thought anything else would be better. She was wrong. Mincheol comes out in a red and blue outfit with suspenders. His justification is that the colors are bright so he won't get hit by a car. Jia gives him a shirt and pants to try and she says they look nice to her. Mincheol proceeds to ask the clerk for 7 sets of the outfit. Jia is outraged but Mincheol says that since it looks good, he should have several of them. Jia decides to pick out a few new outfits so he can rotate between them. While she is looking, Mincheol notices the swimsuits. This prompts him to ask Jia if he can pick out a swimsuit for her for their banana boat ride. Gia agrees without thinking but is embarrassed when she realizes what he asked. Gia and Minchil finished shopping and are heading toward the shore. But Gia is still embarrassed that Minchil picked out her swimsuit. She is obligated to wear it at their next activity and doesn't even know what kind of swimsuit he bought. Gia thinks he bought a sexy one, but that was not the case. Minchil bought her a wetsuit to match his. To Minchil, this was the best choice because they are comfortable and insulated. But to Gia, his choice is embarrassing because this is their honeymoon and everyone else is in bikinis and swim shorts. She was concerned that it would be too hot. To her surprise, the wetsuit was very comfortable. The two had a wonderful time on the banana boat, eating and taking pictures. Toward the end of the day, Gia and Minchil were walking on the beach. Gia wants to do as much as possible because the trip was expensive. But Minchil is concerned that Gia is tired and points out an injury on her heel. Gia was too caught up in the fun to notice it. Minchil offers to give Gia a piggyback ride because walking on an injured heel must hurt. Gia is hesitant because of the schedule, but she eventually hops on Minchil's back. Gia is embarrassed and asks if she is heavy. Minchil points out how her weight makes it a good workout and Gia is offended by this. As they are going, Gia feels comfort from Minchil's back. Gia notices how beautiful the sunset is and insists they take a picture. Minchil doesn't want to, but Gia says that they should live in the moment. Back at the hotel, Gia is looking at the picture and remembers her sister saying that couples normally fight on their honeymoon. But Gia and Minchil didn't fight and they had a lot of fun. But Gia is still embarrassed about being on Minchil's broad warm back. This feeling quickly goes away as she sees Minchil sleeping. She is satisfied with the trip. Back in Korea, Gia's mom made a lot of food and packed boxes to celebrate her coming back and so she can move in with Minchil. Gia is apprehensive but remembers that she agreed to this when she got married. After the move, Minchil presents Gia with a paper. Gia remembers something random about a cartoon theme song. The lyrics were "Just do it, just do it. It's okay to make mistakes because you aren't an adult yet." Gia is just realizing now that this means that you're screwed if you make mistakes as an adult. The point is that since Gia said they should get married, her life has spiraled out of control and now she is living with Minchil. Back the paper. The paper is a contract for living together. Gia is shocked and throws it on the floor. She accepts that they need a contract and they each write 3 conditions. Minchil's rules are no smoking, don't bother Mouse, and say something if something is wrong. Gia's rules are don't enter a room without knocking, don't force anything, and communicate if something is wrong. Gia is outraged about the no smoking rule. Not even her dad could get her to stop. But Minchil doesn't like the smell so he says to smoke in moderation. Gia asks who Mouse is. Mouse is Minchil's cat who is currently at Gia's feet. The cat is named Mouse because cats like mice. Gia eventually says she likes cats, but asks what would happen if she didn't. Minchil says that he would just get another room for Gia to live in. Money wouldn't be a problem because Minchil is serious about marriage. They agree on the rest of the terms and form an official contract. Minchil adds one more thing. Any party can terminate the contract marriage at any time. Gia foreshadows that the contract will bring them many tears and laughs. On the first night living together, Gia decides to not unpack yet and order some furniture. Minchil goes back to work tomorrow and Gia is anxious about living with someone other than her family. Minchil, on the other hand, is not worried and is gaming. The next day, Gia is woken to the sound of Minchil cooking breakfast. Gia is impressed and decides to eat since she's up. But this feeling quickly went away as Minchil put the ingredients into a blender to make a chicken breast smoothie. Gia thinks it tastes terrible and asks if they are having anything else. Minchil says yes and hands her a protein bar. Gia is mad and complains that this isn't real food and comments how Minchil is going to eat a delicious lunch at work by himself. Minchil disproves this by revealing his healthy lunch. Gia looks in the fridge for something to eat and it's filled with healthy food. Gia has a newfound gratitude toward her mom's cooking. Seeing Gia like this, Minchil suggests Gia go out and get breakfast by herself. Gia asks if that's okay and Minchil says that all he needs is his smoothie. Gia has been in the habit of eating with her family, but remembers this is a contract marriage. Minchil leaves and Gia says she's going to get a job soon, and that she'll see him at dinner. The moment Minchil leaves, Gia takes back her words and proudly says she's going to stay unemployed until her bank is empty. Minchil is walking to work and gets into the car of his colleague, Sang Yu Choi. He is surprised that Mincheol suddenly asked him to hand in his request to take 10 days of vacation. Sang-yu notices that Mincheol is smiling, which he rarely does, and asks if something good happened. Mincheol remembers Jia saying goodbye to him, and he responds by saying it's nice knowing someone is waiting for you at home. Sang-yu is confused, but Mincheol clarifies that his wife is at home. Sang-yu is shocked. He thinks Mincheol is messing with him until Mincheol confirms he got married last week. When they get to work, everyone is congratulating Mincheol, and he hands them souvenirs from his honeymoon. But before Sang-yu can get to work, manager Suyeon-so pulls him aside and is angry that Mincheol got married, suggesting she liked him. Sang-yu responds by saying that it was unexpected because Mincheol didn't seem interested in girls. 33-year-old Suyeon's past is now summarized. She was seen as a child genius and just wanted a moderately okay guy. As she climbed to success, she remained single. She is annoyed that she can't find a decent guy. Then she realizes that this decent guy she wanted was Mincheol. But her dreams of marrying Mincheol are now shattered. All she can do now is consult with the Sang-yu who went to university with her and is the quote-unquote company Cupid. After work, Sang-yu and Suyeon follow Mincheol home to check if he's really married. Then, they see Mincheol talking to a girl on the street just to see an angry Jia smoking. Jia is angry because Mincheol didn't call her when he was coming home late because she waited for him to eat dinner. Sang-yu and Suyeon are skeptical that Jia is the type of girl Mincheol is interested in. Mincheol assumes Jia didn't want to eat with him because of what happened at breakfast, but Jia insists the problem is that he didn't call her. Mincheol asks if he is allowed to call her because Jia didn't like him calling her in 5th grade when he called to play. Jia said that she had to use the house phone, but is interrupted when he sees two people looking at them around the corner. Sang-yu and Suyeon hide and Mincheol confirms that he is allowed to call Jia. Mincheol had another chicken breast smoothie for dinner. Jia recalls her past with Mincheol and remembers that she stopped hanging out with him around 5th grade. They were close when they were younger, but stopped because she was teased for hanging around a boy. Jia continued to ignore Mincheol throughout middle school. Jia now feels bad about being angry at Mincheol. Before she can apologize, Mincheol sends Jia her favorite food, which is spicy chicken feet. Then, Jia barges into Mincheol's room. Instantly, Mincheol points out how she broke the rule, but Jia says that since there's a problem, they need to talk it out to fix it. Jia and Mincheol sit down to talk. Jia starts by complaining how Mincheol didn't get her beer to accompany her chicken feet. Jia gets to the point and says they haven't had a real conversation before, so she thought it would be good to talk and eat. Jia offers a beer to Mincheol, which he instantly rejects. Jia is concerned, but Mincheol just doesn't want to lose his gains. Instead of beer, Mincheol gets water and he asks what Jia wanted to talk about. Jia didn't have anything planned and is just going to make it up. 2 hours later, Jia is drunk and talking about Mincheol and her playing games in the past. Then, Jia fell asleep. Mincheol abruptly wakes her up with an alarm and tells her to go to her room and sleep and that he'll clean up. Jia notes that she is drunk because she drank the alcohol she bought for 2 people. In her drunken state, Jia asks Mincheol if she can see his ear. When Mincheol approaches, Jia takes his glasses and points out how his eyesight is bad. Mincheol wants them back and pushes Jia against the wall. She is having fun until she realizes that Mincheol is very attractive without his glasses, and they are very close together, so she gets embarrassed. Jia gives the glasses back and flees to her room. She is very embarrassed and doesn't know what to do. The next day, Jia stares at Mincheol as he leaves for work. She wants to apologize about last night, so things can go back to normal. When she attempts to say sorry, she gets nervous and says I meow because the cat said meow. Mincheol is confused. At work, Mincheol asks Sung-yu about Jia's meowing. Sung-yu thinks he is bragging, but Mincheol is genuinely confused. Sung-yu suggests that Jia was trying to be cute, but Mincheol says they aren't close enough to joke around together. Sung-yu, who supposedly has a doctorate in loviology, has a simple solution. He says that Mincheol needs sympathy. So, when he gets home, Mincheol meows at Jia. Jia falls to the floor in embarrassment. Mincheol states that Sung-yu said this would help, but Jia is mad that he told other people about it. To avoid situations like this, they added a clause in their contract to keep what happens between them a secret. A few days after, Suyeon suggests that Mincheol host a housewarming party. When Mincheol tells Jia this, she is initially hesitant, but she eventually agrees to do it. Mincheol asks why, but Jia insists. Housewarming parties are parties held after getting a new house or getting married. It is a party to ask for people's continued support in the future. It's not required, but it's something that only happens once or twice in your lifetime. You'd normally want to avoid it because it's a lot of work, but Gia wants to because Mincheol hates the idea. This is revenge for making her embarrassed yesterday. The next day, after protesting with Gia about how they don't need to have a party, he leaves for work with a smile. Gia has noticed a few key traits about Mincheol. Number 1. Mincheol is all about efficiency, almost like an eco-friendly robot. Number 2. Mincheol is weak to requests and will comply if you push enough. Based on these traits, Gia thinks Mincheol was going to tell the office that his wife didn't want to have a housewarming party. Gia gets embarrassed by what Mincheol refers to her at work. Gia starts preparations and starts to regret it. She doesn't know how to cook well and calls her mother for help. Soon, everyone arrives and Gia whispers to Mincheol that he should be nice to her. Everyone is amazed at the array of food Gia cooked. Mincheol clearly doesn't want to be there and even starts drinking. Sung-yu asks Soo-yeon if she is satisfied in knowing Mincheol is actually married, but she isn't and has something prepared to test them. Sung-yu starts by saying they'd like to use this time to get to know Mincheol better. Everyone wrote down something they wanted to know about him. The first request is Soo-yeon's. It is for them to kiss. Gia wants to hear the first request, but Sung-yu is apprehensive and skips to the next question. Gia says that to prevent a headache, they should just pretend to be a happy couple. The next question is when, where, and how did he propose? If they can't answer, they have to drink a whole glass of beer. Gia can't think of a good fake response, but Mincheol says that Gia proposed in a smoking area while he was eating chicken breast. While this is true, Gia decides to not say anything and drink. The next question is when and where was their first kiss? The problem is, they haven't kissed and even fake kissed at their wedding. Gia decides to drink, but to her surprise, Mincheol says they kissed at 5 years old in kindergarten. Gia doesn't remember, but Mincheol reminds her that her nickname in kindergarten was the smooching ghost because she went around kissing everyone. Gia is mad that Mincheol would bring this up. The party soon ended and everyone went home, but Sung-yu and Soo-yeon agree that their actions seem fake. When Sung-yu asks if they should look deeper, Soo-yeon says no. Sung-yu is shocked and almost gets into an accident. Soo-yeon says that it's okay because she didn't think she could force her way into their relationship. Sung-yu is surprised and decides they should go drink at a fancy barbecue place. Suddenly, they ended up waking up in the same bed together naked. Will this be the start of a romantic relationship? Back in Gia and Mincheol's apartment, Gia explains why talking about them kissing in kindergarten and proposing in a smoking area is embarrassing. Gia thinks this is common sense, but remembers that he's dealing with Mincheol. Gia says they should pick another time for their first kiss. Before they can decide, Gia gets a call from her mom. Her mom called to say Spaghetti Man Loses His Way came out today. Spaghetti Man is a work that started hero movies. Gia asks if her mom watched the movie as soon as it came out and says yes. Immediately after, Gia's mom tries to spoil the movie, but Gia ends the call before she gets the chance. Gia's family has a punishment system where if you don't watch a movie the day it comes out, someone who watches it will spoil it for everyone. The competition is fierce for big movies like Spaghetti Man, so Gia decides Mincheol and her need to watch it right now. Gia is enjoying herself with her popcorn, but Mincheol looks nervous. He says that this feels like a date. Gia is shocked. The movie was very good and they got embarrassed while trying to eat popcorn at the same time. Gia wonders what Mincheol thinks of the movie. Little does she know, Mincheol has been following the Spaghetti Man series for 20-some years. On their way out, Gia is talking about the movie with Mincheol and realizes that this feels like a date. Then, Gia gets pushed from behind and Mincheol catches her in his arms. Due to the sudden nature of the catch, they ended up accidentally kissing. Mincheol puts her down. Gia says that it didn't count because of the 3-second rule and then runs away in embarrassment. Mincheol found Gia in the smoking area and made her air out her clothes. Mincheol then confirms the kiss didn't count because of the 3-second rule. They then decide to go to lunch and Gia can't get the image of the kiss out of her head. Gia feels like she's overreacting, but Mincheol says he needs to get something off his chest and reveals the kiss was actually 5 seconds. Mincheol suggests they make this first kiss, but Gia is mad and runs away because she couldn't look at Mincheol. Gia decided to move in with her sister. Jaemin and Jinwoo are not impressed. Then, the 13,261st Jia summit started. This included Jia from 6 different ages. She explains the situation and thinks that what Minchil said was rude. Jia didn't want to go back to her parents' place, so she is at Jimin's place now. 15-year-old Jia asks if she can stay at a friend's place, but that is not possible. Jia's plan works because Jimin owes her for bringing them together, giving them money for dates, and convincing them to get married. However, Jimin is not happy. Despite the gift, Jia and Jimin start talking. They note how Jimin's children take after Jia, and when she tries to spoil the Spaghetti Man movie, Jia reveals she already watched it. Jimin asks what happened with Minchil and guesses that Jia ran away after fighting with Minchil. Jia confirms this. Jimin then agrees to let Jia stay there to babysit the kids so they can go out. Jia isn't happy about this, but she doesn't have a choice. After 2 hours, Jia realizes how hard it is to be a parent. The doorbell rings and thinking that it's a delivery, she opens the door to find Minchil standing there. Jia slams the door shut and is wondering what he is doing there. One of the children says that if someone who looks like Minchil comes, he should be let in because he has food. Jia has been set up. While the kids are eating ice cream, Jia and Minchil get to talking. Minchil reveals that Jimin told him that she was here. Jia protests, but Minchil reminds her how the contract said they need to talk it out. Minchil asks why she is mad. After pondering the question while feeding the kids ice cream, which Minchil refuses to eat, she remembers it's not a big deal since they're both adults. After Jimin and Jinu got back, they left together for the apartment. On their way back, Minchil apologizes and says he should have thought about it and said sorry earlier. Jia says that Minchil is only saying that because that is what Jia wants to hear. She continues by saying Minchil should be punished with a forehead flick. Minchil doesn't want one due to past forehead flicking trauma. Before the flick, Jia says she's mad because she doesn't want her first kiss to be an accident. Jia decides to kiss Minchil on the forehead and says that this is their first kiss. At work, Minchil is discussing with Sungyu how Jia is mad that people think their first kiss was in kindergarten. Minchil is worried about how to correct this. But Sungyu shouts that this isn't anything to worry about and explains how he has been very tired ever since the party. Minchil says that they all left laughing and smiling so he shouldn't be tired. Sungyu avoids the topic and Suyeon appears. Sungyu and Suyeon are so embarrassed they can't even look at each other. Suyeon flees when Minchil waves. Sungyu introduces himself again. He is very talkative and claims to have a doctorate in loviology, but it's all a lie. He is really an introvert who likes staying at home. But, since he has 3 sisters, he hears a lot of conversations. This made him an expert in reading clues from women. This skill was exhibited at a young age. He quickly became the god of dating because he matches so many together, but he never had a girlfriend before. After his entanglement in the sheets with Suyeon, he was lost because Suyeon apologized after. Sungyu first met Suyeon in college, where he was a freshman and she was a senior. Suyeon was very demanding, but now she is just another adult. So, they decided to forget what happened that night. Now, Sungyu and Suyeon are now awkward every time they meet, indicating they aren't actually adults yet. Suddenly, in the elevator, Sungyu breaks the silence by calling out to Suyeon. But, Sungyu could not get himself to talk about anything and was interrupted by a delivery man. As the day passed, Sungyu was still caught up thinking about Suyeon. Minchil notices this and asks him what's wrong while handing him a red ginseng stick. Sungyu says nothing's wrong, but then comes to a profound realization. Minchil is married and could help solve his problem. Sangyu asks for advice on how to break the awkwardness after a fight. Minchil recalls how he isn't supposed to talk about the marriage, but also remembers how he can be flexible at times. Minchil decides to be flexible and says that their last fight was resolved by Jia kissing him. This is not what Sungyu wanted to hear. After work, Sungyu is walking and is mad how he gives good advice, but no one can give him advice. He decides to call his second oldest sister, Yenju, for help. She is a popular romance novelist and influencer. Sungyu explains his problem, stating that this is actually his friend's problem, not his. She understands the problem, but wants something in return. Sungyu offers to get her 2 boxes of her favorite macarons, and she agrees. But, before Yenju starts, she asks if the friend Sungyu is asking for his name Sungyu Choi. After realizing he was caught, Sungyu hung up the phone. But, not all hope is lost as he runs into Jia. The conversation is awkward as they make small talk, and shortly ends as Jia says she needs to go and runs away. Sungyu feels like he recognizes Jia from somewhere. He asks Jia if she is flaming hot chicken feet. Jia is shocked and stops running. Initially, Jia acts like she doesn't know who that is. Sung-yu continues by saying that he is Yenju's little brother, listed off romance novels she's written, such as Is It Hot Because It's Summer and Why Would I Be a No for Miss No, and even said he got her autograph. Jia's pen name is Flaming Hot Chicken Feet. In college, Jia chose a major to get a job rather than chasing her dreams. She barely got into university and didn't enjoy the social life. With nothing to do, she spent her time reading novels at her friend's place. Her friend was Yenju Choi. She was shy and quiet, but what made her special is that she wrote novels. Jia saw her works and decided that writing looked like fun. She was bored and decided to give it a try. 3 months later, Jia won an award and officially became a writer. But Yenju appears jealous. She debuted soon after. Jia didn't expect to win, so she chose a silly pen name. Jia went with Sung-yu to talk at a cafe because she didn't have a choice. Sung-yu gives Jia the situation. Jia starts by asking if Sung-yu needs someone to listen to him or someone who gives him a push. Sung-yu is shocked. Jia continues by saying that Sung-yu is clearly interested in the girl. After hearing Jia's advice, Sung-yu leaves and comments how writers have no empathy, but it was still useful. Sung-yu calls Suyeon. Suyeon is shocked and picks up. Sung-yu says that he just wanted to hear her voice. Apparently, that wasn't enough, and he asks Suyeon if he can come to her right now. Suyeon is concerned because it's late, but Sung-yu reveals he's outside her house. He says it will only take a minute. Suyeon doesn't want to because she is flustered, already took off her makeup and ready for bed. But she agrees and says she'll need 30 minutes to get ready. Suyeon appears dressed in an intricate outfit. They go sit on the swings to talk. Sung-yu says he wanted to see her to give her some macarons. Suyeon is impressed because the place always has a long line, and they are delicious. This isn't the real reason Sung-yu called her out. Suyeon starts to leave because she thinks that's all Sung-yu had to say, but Sung-yu stops her. He insists that they should stay on the swings because it is fun. Sung-yu musters up some courage and says they need to talk about that day. Suyeon says they agreed to forget about it, but Sung-yu says he can't despite his best effort. Sung-yu says this is because this is his first time doing stuff like that. Suyeon denies this because he is a relationship expert, but it is true. Sung-yu ends by saying that if she wants him to forget it, she will have to tell him how to forget it. But Suyeon doesn't know how to do that and says she doesn't want to forget either. The scene abruptly jumps to Mincheol's house. Jia is eating macarons and Mincheol asks if you gained weight. Jia is shocked and almost chokes. Jia denies it, but Mincheol was actually talking to Mouse. Mouse feels heavier than usual. Jia says that maybe it's because of the cold weather and Mouse is getting ready for hibernation. Mincheol agrees and decides to turn up the thermostat. The next morning, Jia tells Mincheol to have a great day at work and Mincheol surprisingly says see you tonight. Jia is concerned that perhaps Mincheol has caught on to Jia feeding Mouse snacks. Mincheol has an automatic pet feeder that dispenses 3.3 ounces of food per day. Jia saw a mouse crying for snacks because the feeder only gave a set amount, and she gave in. This is why Mouse gained weight. Jia thinks Mouse didn't gain a lot of weight because she would play with Mouse after the snack. But upon picking Mouse up, Mouse is heavier. But Mouse is not the only person who gained weight. Jia had been ordering delivery often to the apartment. Jia decides to step on a scale that she always ignored. The number is a lot higher than expected. The scale must be broken because her clothes still fit. But when she bent down, she heard a ripping noise and knew something needed to change. That evening, Jia asks Mincheol to teach her to work out. Mincheol is very happy and excitedly asks when they can start. Mincheol is very dedicated and workouts every day after work. When Jia tries, she is incapacitated after a few sets and she still has to do legs. Jia is transported to the beach. She says that an asteroid is going to hit Earth and this is their last night. She asks what they could do to make the last night meaningful. Mincheol says the answer is obvious. They will work on legs. Jia wakes up from her dream and is unable to move from being sore. Mincheol was excited that Jia wanted to work out, but is concerned at how much she is struggling. Back at the gym, Jia is doing lunges while Mincheol is cheering her on. At home, Mincheol prepares vegetables for Jia to eat and suggests she take a walk. Jia thinks that she should have lost for 6 pounds by now, but the scale did not change. Back at the gym, Mincheol says if Jia does a routine for 3 minutes per day, she will improve. The first is a 60-second plank. This is hard and Jia needed to do 3 sets. After the sets, Jia thought she had died. Jia looks at Mincheol and is surprised how much he can bench. He was benching 350 pounds for reps. Then, a girl approaches Mincheol and asks if he's a personal trainer. Mincheol is confused, but the girl continues by asking if he could teach her how to use the machines. Mincheol agrees, and Jia is shocked. Mincheol shows her how to use the machines and how to do squats, but she is touching Mincheol a lot. This upsets Jia. The girl falls in a cute manner and says it's her first time, but Jia knows it's not. Then the girl says Mincheol is totally her type and asks if he wants to go for coffee after. Jia is shocked, and while she isn't supposed to get involved with his life, she shouts out to Mincheol. Mincheol declines the girl's offer by saying that he is married and announces that Jia is his wife. The entire gym and the girl are shocked. The girl flees from embarrassment. Mincheol and Jia leave the gym, but Jia is also embarrassed. Jia asks if this type of thing happens often, and Mincheol confirms. But Mincheol always declines because he doesn't want to go to a cafe or bar after a workout because there's nothing to eat. But he would go if they had protein shakes. Every time, the girl stops coming to the gym 3 days later. Jia is put at ease because she knows nothing will happen. Jia is grateful that Mincheol is helping her, but she wants to quit because it's hard. On their way back, Jia notices that Mincheol is smiling. He says it's because he gets to work out with Jia. This makes it hard for Jia to quit. The next morning, Jia goes for a light jog to relieve muscle aches. At the track, a hooded man asks if she is Jia, and Jia is shocked to see this man. Jia tries to run away, but since they are both out of shape and the man has asthma, they stop. The man gives Jia his business card. His name is Yang Duek Na and a former main producer. His business card has a ruler, but it is wrong. He printed it wrong on purpose for marketing. Since Jia asked about it, the marketing worked. Yang Duek asks if Jia is still writing. Jia says that's insulting, and he apologizes for what happened. He gets a call for a meeting and says they should get dinner sometime. As he leaves, Jia crumbles up the card and starts jogging again. Jia returns home, and Mincheol is concerned why they are eating a candlelit dinner with fancy clothing and cutlery. Jia wanted to mix things up because they eat the same thing every day. Mincheol is uncomfortable and Jia feels bad about it. After dinner, she is in her room and anxious about how she keeps running into people from her past. Then, Mincheol knocks on her door wearing a suit and asks for a dance. Jia tries to close the door, but Mincheol blocks it. Jia concedes, and they sit on the sofa. Mincheol says that Jia was acting weird, so he wanted to cheer her up with a dance. Jia is confused, but Mincheol says that this is what they do in the movies. Jia thinks this is romantic. Jia asks what type of movies Mincheol is referring to, and he says Bollywood movies. In those films, they dance all the time, including when they are sad and during gunfights. Mincheol continues by saying that when you do something alone, it is weird, but when you do it together, it is fun. So, they might as well make the weird setting fun. Jia bursts into laughter and confirms that she said that. Jia then suggests that she has something better than dancing. They go to a barbecue spot and have pork belly and soju. Mincheol comments how they could have gone to somewhere nice with candles since they dressed up, but Jia says there is fire right in front of them. Jia says getting dressed up and going to a fancy restaurant is normal, but going dressed up to a barbecue place is weirder and more fun. Just thought of something fun. She picks up greens and tells Mincheol to say ah. Mincheol protests, but Jia says to play along. Mincheol realizes that Jia put peppers in the greens and has a funny reaction. They then go to karaoke. Jia is having fun. She never thought that doing something that is seen as weird would be exciting, but she had too much fun and got embarrassed. Mincheol, on the other hand, doesn't get embarrassed and just enjoys it. Jia then thanks Mincheol for hanging out with her, and Mincheol is confused. Jia says that she'll repay him for the night and says they should go home. But before they leave, Mincheol grabs her hand and asks why Jia always has the last word and that he has something to say. He puts his hands on her chin as if he's preparing to kiss her. Jia remembers when she was 10 years old and watching a drama series. This is where she discovered that kissing is embarrassing. Jia asks her mom why they are kissing when it is embarrassing, but her mom says it's fine. Her mom later explained that those types of moments happen out the blue and Jia didn't understand. But now, she does. Jia puckers her lips and is ready to kiss. But Mincheol has other plans. He picks a loose thread that was on her neck that was bothering him. Jia is mad. She grabs Mincheol by the tie and kisses him. Mincheol is confused, but Jia said it was complimentary. She continues by saying she did it because she wanted to. In the bathroom, Jia is embarrassed that she kissed Mincheol in a public place. Her excuse was nonsense. Mincheol is also in the bathroom washing his face. She does not know why she kissed Mincheol. After recalling key moments from her marriage, she laughs and has a realization. While they were kissing, several small Gia-like figures stop them and demand they kiss better. For a real kiss, you have to stick your tongue in their mouth and move it around. Gia confirms that she did this. Then, the small Gias tell them to kiss again and they do. But, this was all a dream and Gia woke up. Gia is surprised she had a dream about kissing Mincheol. She walks to the bathroom and upon opening the door, Mincheol is there. He just finished his shower and looks incredibly hot. Gia is embarrassed. Mincheol asks if Gia is in a bad mood, but she says she had a bad dream. She remembers them eating yesterday, and she slams her head on the table in embarrassment. Gia covers this up when Mincheol asks by saying there was a mosquito on the table. Gia believes that she is a victim of the suspension bridge effect, which means feelings of excitement towards someone increases during a time of anxiety. Every day is a time of anxiety because she is worried they might get caught and because she is working out. She concludes that this is a misinterpretation of feelings. Mincheol kneels down to Gia's level and asks if she is sick. Gia gets embarrassed because he is too close. She says she's fine, so Mincheol is relieved. But, he wants to talk about last night. Before he gets the chance, Gia leaves. Mincheol is now at work and Sung-yu notices Mincheol's mismatching socks and suggests that he had a hectic morning. Mincheol even threw out the full instant coffee packet instead of the end. While drinking, he remembers his kiss with Gia and doesn't know what to do. Mincheol and Gia are now at the gym to work out, but their interactions are awkward. It was just an accident, but Gia is still bothered by it. Gia thinks that Mincheol isn't bothered by it either because he doesn't have a visible reaction. After stretching, Mincheol says they will do the bench press. Gia is concerned because she saw a video of someone getting crushed by the weight and that she shouldn't do it. Mincheol says that while it could happen, he has a lot of experience, so she'll probably be fine. Gia lies down and is scared of the bar. She says if she gets crushed, she is going to write Mincheol's name in her will even though she will be dead. Mincheol added to 20 pounds plates and Gia is ready to go. Gia is concerned but Mincheol says it's fine because it's only 60 pounds total. Mincheol lifts up the bar and tells Gia to give it a try. Gia is embarrassed and grabs the bar. While she is lowering the bar with Mincheol's help, Gia is worried because it feels like her heart is going to pound out of her chest. Gia is concerned that Mincheol is too close to her, so she starts doing reps on her own. After the bench, Gia thinks that they ended their relationship the way it is. Since she is sweating, she takes off her tracksuit but Mincheol puts it back on her. Gia is confused but Mincheol says that she might get a cold. Gia confirms by saying that she doesn't want a cold, but she continues by asking if what Mincheol just said was nonsense. She can't stop a cold with her thin jacket. If she could, everyone else in the gym would be frozen. Gia notices Mincheol looking away and asks if Mincheol is bothered by Gia's clothing being too thin. Mincheol responds by taking his shirt off. Gia tries to stop him and Mincheol asks if taking his shirt off bothers her. Gia avoids the question, but Mincheol continues by saying that it bothers him when Gia does it and aligns her jacket. On their way back, Mincheol was silent. Gia remembers that Mincheol has always been this way. When Gia hurt her leg when they were kids, Mincheol insisted on carrying her home even though he was shorter than her. It took them 2 hours to go home when it was normally a 20-minute walk, but Mincheol was happy about it. Back to the present, Mincheol says Gia did a good job and to keep it up tomorrow. Gia seems happy and grabs Mincheol's hand. Mincheol is confused. Gia says that he has a problem he can let go. Gia then ponders that if they had a different start, how would it end up? The scene shifts to Yeonju and Youngduek having dinner. He mentions that he recently saw Gia. Yeonju asks who that is, but when Youngduek describes what she was doing and who she is, Yeonju avoids the topic and says they should eat before their steak gets cold. Youngduek believes that she hadn't gotten over what happened. The scene shifts back to Sung-yu and Soo-yeon on the swings. Before Soo-yeon could say anything meaningful, she gets embarrassed and says they should talk another time. Sung-yu is mad and asks if he's too much for her. Soo-yeon knows, but she's scared of changing their relationship because Sung-yu is the only person she can really talk to. But Sung-yu isn't happy and points out that Soo-yeon crossed the line first and initiated. Then, Sung-yu declared that he likes Soo-yeon. Soo-yeon agrees to go out with Sung-yu. Sung-yu and Soo-yeon are now dating, and their car ride with Mincheol is awkward. At the office, Sung-yu is focused on his work and doesn't even eat lunch with Soo-yeon. They say goodbye after work and exchange texts. This cycle repeats until Sung-yu realizes this is no different than before. Soo-yeon has the same idea that they need something to break the pattern. Soo-yeon texts first and asks if he has a sec, but she misspells it, which confuses Sung-yu. Suyin quickly corrects it, but once again clicks X instead of C. Suyin is very embarrassed, and Sung-yu calls her. Suyin picks up, and Sung-yu asks if Suyin meant to say if he had a second to talk, and that he does have time to talk. Sung-yu's consideration had a huge effect on Suyin, and she is silent. This silence makes Sung-yu think he messed up, but Suyin then confirms that she meant to say that. They make small talk, but Suyin doesn't have the courage to say anything, so she yawns. Sung-yu compliments her voice, and before Suyin can hang up, Sung-yu suggests they go on a date. Suyin is confused, but agrees. Sung-yu suggests that they go now despite it being 11:38 p.m. because he wants to see her right now. But Suyin angrily says that it's rude to show up out of nowhere when she isn't ready. They decide on a later day for the date. On the day of the date, they meet up, but Suyin is wearing a trench coat with a hat, mask and sunglasses, so no one recognizes her. They decide to go into the movies and question the odds that they run into something they know. Then they run into Jia. They exchange awkward greetings until Jia notices Suyin. She remembers Sung-yu asking for advice, and now knows he was successful. Jia congratulates Sung-yu, but Suyin is concerned about what to do. Jia makes fun of them going on a date during the day, and they leave. On their way out, Suyin says that she notices Sung-yu and Jia were surprisingly close. Sung-yu then hugs Suyin. Mincheol then appears holding a spaghetti man branded tomato sauce that is limited to one per customer. Sung-yu hugs Suyin, so Mincheol didn't notice them. When Mincheol leaves, they separate and get embarrassed. They express how hot it is, which is from their embarrassment, and decide to get cold noodles for lunch. At the trending cold noodle place, more people from the office were there, so they had an awkward lunch. At karaoke, someone from work was there. Even the once famous cafe is closed. After getting ice cream, Sung-yu complains how they keep running into people at work. Then, he notices that Suyin has ice cream on her cheek and decides to clean it up with his finger and lick it. Suyin and Sung-yu are embarrassed, but Sung-yu is still happy about the day. As the day comes to an end, they don't want to say goodbye, but they've done everything they planned and can't think of anything else. Sung-yu suggests they need to get going, and Suyin agrees. Suddenly, they appear in front of a motel, and Sung-yu is in awe of its size. Sung-yu cannot think straight and grabs Suyin's hand and pulls her into the building. To her surprise, they are in an arcade, not the motel. But Sung-yu thinks Suyin is disappointed they didn't go into the motel when in reality, she is embarrassed that her mind is in the gutter. Sung-yu does not know what to do. He grabs Suyin and says that he remembers she wanted this fox plush. Suyin denies it, but Sung-yu insists she spent $50 trying to get it. Sung-yu declares that he will get the fox. This is his chance to make it up to her. He is determined to get the fox. After spending $120, the owner gave them a similar-looking fox. Sung-yu thinks he's screwed. They couldn't do any of the activities in peace, and it was the worst date imaginable. They arrive at Suyin's house and Sung-yu apologizes for the awful first date. But Suyin had fun today. The cold noodles were delicious. Trying to get the fox was fun, and trying to avoid people was exciting. Sung-yu is embarrassed and insists that he will get her a bigger fox on their next date. They part ways and Sung-yu goes home to his parents and declares he loves them. Suyin puts the fox next to a bunny plush Sung-yu got her in the past and is happy. Back at Mincheol's house, they are watching Spaghetti Man on the sofa and Jia is sleeping on Mincheol's lap. Back earlier in the day, Jia had gotten a call from her family and was about to get the Galaxy Wars movie spoiled. So, Jia and Mincheol go watch the movie. Jia is on a diet, so she gets Diet Coke with popcorn. But the movie was boring and Jia is in agony because she suggested they watch it. Jaimin knew how bad it was and suggested it anyway. Back at the house, Jia decides that she's going to watch a real movie. Jia says that Mincheol can do anything he wants, but he sits on the sofa and watches with her. Mincheol is eating carrots and cucumbers during the movie, and Jia thinks this is weird, but she ended up mindlessly eating them during the movie. They ended up watching 3 movies, which brings us back to the present. Jia fell asleep on Mincheol's lap and was embarrassed. Jia quickly moves away and asks how long she was like that. Mincheol says about 1 hour. Jia is worried that something happened while she was asleep. So, she asked Mincheol if something happened and he starts talking about things that happened in the movie, not real life. Jia notices that the only time Mincheol has shown emotion is when she asked him to work out. She realizes that she is just dragging Mincheol into things. Jia decides to lay down and poke Mincheol with her feet, stating that she has long legs. Mincheol is confused, asking if she has a reason. She does not. Mincheol decides to massage Jia's feet. He does not have a reason for this either, but Jia is shocked. Jia says it tickles, but Mincheol continues because he is concerned about her muscles being tight. Jia is having a good time and remembers that Mincheol has always been good at stuff like back rubs. This is until Mincheol pressed her foot too hard, causing Jia to shoot up and her face to be right next to Mincheol's. Jia gets embarrassed and it seems they are about to kiss. But Jia's foot starts to cramp and Mincheol starts to meow in response. Jia is confused, but he insists that this is to scare away the cramp. Jia is now washing her face and realizes that she is always the one embarrassed. But that is not important because they almost kissed during the massage, which is a problem. Everything was there and it was going to happen if Jia didn't cramp. Jia remembers that Mincheol didn't look like he was against the idea. She wants Mincheol to make the first move for once, but then she realizes that he is generally clueless. Then, Jia tastes something bitter and thinks it's cucumber. But Jia didn't eat cucumber during the movie because she doesn't like it. There is only one possibility. Mincheol must have kissed when she was asleep on his lap. Before Mincheol leaves for work the next day, Jia asks if nothing truly happened. Mincheol says nothing happened, and when Jia pressed about it, Mincheol got embarrassed and left. Jia now knows something happened and planned to mess with Mincheol for the next few days. But Mincheol started to avoid Jia at all costs. Jia respects Mincheol's privacy, but it's almost as if he is avoiding all conversation with Jia. After a few days of this, Mincheol even texted her that he is not going to the gym. Jia is shocked and decides to start typing a long message. But then Mincheol calls her and she leaves for a bar. When he arrives, Mincheol is sleeping on the table and Sungyu is crying. From the table, Jia thinks they are both extremely drunk. Jia realizes that since Mincheol is red from drinking too much, Sungyu is the source of the problem. When Jia confronts Sungyu, he says that Mincheol is the one who wanted to drink. Sungyu mentioned that Mincheol seemed off for the last few days and was making mistakes. He asked if Jia and Mincheol had a fight. In the taxi ride home, Jia ponders this question and Mincheol drunkenly asks if Jia is there while leaning on her. During this, Mincheol tries to kiss Jia. When Jia says no, Mincheol recalls that Jia said it's up to the person that gives a kiss. Jia denies this. Jia actually said it's complimentary service, but it's the same thing despite Jia trying to deny it. The driver asks if they are newlyweds. Jia gets embarrassed and realizes that they are acting like a newlywed couple. Then, the driver comments how Jia's husband must love her, and Jia remembers that Mincheol is actually her husband. When Jia says Mincheol is a thorn in her side, the driver asks if they got in a fight. Jia decides they should go somewhere other than Mincheol's apartment. Mincheol soon wakes up, and he and Jia are in a Ferris wheel. Jia had gotten all-access passes to an amusement park. Since barely anyone else is on the Ferris wheel, they can use the pass to keep going around the Ferris wheel. Mincheol tries to get off, but Jia stops him. Jia then asks Mincheol if he remembers passing out at the bar. She believes he was drinking because of her, and the contract says that they need to talk it out. Jia wanted to talk about it, but Mincheol kept avoiding her. Because of all the trouble she's been through, Mincheol owes it to her to stay on the Ferris wheel. A Jia Han-sponsored event occurs, and they begin their first round of truth or dare. Mincheol is confused. Jia explains that you need to answer the question truthfully, or you get punished, which is a forehead flick. If he lies, the game ends. Mincheol doesn't want a forehead flick, and this makes Jia remember kissing his forehead. Mincheol still doesn't want to since truth or dare makes a fool of the person. Jia says that this won't happen because she won't lie due to her having an unpleasant memory relating to Yenju. Jia provokes Mincheol by saying that this is his chance to ask her anything and even flick her. Mincheol agrees and asks who goes first. They play rock paper scissors for it and Jia wins. Jia's question is if Mincheol likes her. Mincheol gets embarrassed and doesn't answer. The countdown is up and Jia flicks his forehead. It is Mincheol's turn and he asks if she likes him. Jia says that she doesn't not like him and gets embarrassed. Mincheol is confused and tries to ask another question, but Jia stops him. Jia starts her next question. She says she could taste cucumbers after the movie even though she doesn't eat cucumbers. Also, Mincheol started avoiding her after that night. Jia asks if Mincheol did something while she was sleeping. Mincheol is speechless. Jia continues by asking if Mincheol kissed her that night. Jia says that there's no point in avoiding it because they're going to stay there until she gets the answer. Mincheol says that he didn't kiss her. Jia ends the game and declares Mincheol is lying. Mincheol says that he did kiss her that night, just not on the lips. He kissed her forehead. The reason she tasted cucumbers is because he put his finger on her lips. Mincheol says that he was looking at her face while she was sleeping and it just happened. Jia is confused why they had all this trouble, because Mincheol kissed her once. Mincheol apologizes, but Jia feels disappointed, suggesting that she wanted something more. Mincheol apologizes again. Jia says he doesn't have to, but he is apologizing for what he is about to do. Fireworks go off and Mincheol kisses Jia on the lips. Jia is shocked that Mincheol is the one initiating. The kiss was bitter because Mincheol was eating cucumbers at the bar. Jia pulls away because of the taste, and before she can ask a question, Mincheol passes out. Jia is struggling to take Mincheol out of the Ferris wheel. Jia and Mincheol refer to this night as the first great drinking apocalypse. Because of this, they added no kissing after eating cucumbers to their contract. As Mincheol leaves for work, he says that he thought she would be more mad. Mincheol says that since he can't kiss after eating cucumbers, then he can when he hasn't. Jia demands Mincheol to leave for work. At work, Mincheol apologizes to Sungyu about last night. While Jia is vacuuming, she gets a notification on her phone. Her stock portfolio had gone down significantly. Jia is devastated. Jia is not a freelancer who's not working. She is a freelancer who doesn't need to work. The royalties and dividends from stocks she owns is enough to pay the bills. She is quite loaded. Well, she was loaded. Jia thinks her stock app is broken. Why else would the value be falling so much? She lost 9.28%. Jia decides to wait it out because selling is for noobs. Her stocks went down before, so it's fine. For days later, she has lost 18.18% and Mincheol is concerned by her behavior. There is news that a businessman is getting a divorce, so Jia sells her stocks. The next morning, the stock is up 12.3%. Jia is very angry and starts cussing the businessman out. Jia decides to go out and eat. Jia realizes that if she buys stocks when they're down, she's basically getting a discount. Jia continues to sell her stocks low and buys high. Jia is now at the gym and her stocks are worth less than her original investment. Mincheol asks if Jia is going to work out and she says yes. Mincheol also asks if Jia has been playing a game on her phone since she's always looking at it. Jia decides to lie to not worry Mincheol and says she has been watching a show. After their workout, Jia's investment goes even lower and she deletes the app because she can't stand to look at it. Later that day, there was a scandal with the businessman which caused the stock to plummet further. She should have sold her stocks, but if she never sells, she never actually lost any money. This is perfect logic for Jia. Then, Mincheol appears and asks Jia a question. He looks very concerned and asks if Jia likes someone else. Jia is shocked. She denies it and Mincheol said that saw a video about married couples. It said that if your spouse starts acting differently, they might have someone else. Jia is still confused, until she realizes she checked off all the boxes for suspicious behavior. Mincheol pointed out that she also lied at the gym when she said she was watching a show. Mincheol says that Jia has a tendency to share interesting and funny things with others, but Jia didn't share the name of the show with Mincheol. Jia thinks Mincheol took it the wrong way, so she tells him the truth. Mincheol is shocked that Jia lost that much. But Jia just didn't want Mincheol to worry. Mincheol is concerned and asks if it's really okay that she lost all her savings and what is going to do about living expenses. Jia says that she will just work for money, but it is not actually fine. But what is worse than losing her money is the impression this left on Mincheol. Mincheol suggests that he could pick up more of the bills, but Jia stops him. Jia says that they should take care of their own issues when it comes to money, which is why she didn't tell him at first. This is a matter of pride for Jia. When she moved out, she promised herself that she would handle her own life. She is proud she hasn't had to borrow money from anyone. Mincheol stands up and says that he trusts Jia while touching her ears. Jia is embarrassed and smacks Mincheol on the forehead. Mincheol was simply giving Jia his energy by touching her ears. Mincheol says they used to do this in the past, and they would yell energy infusion when doing it. Jia smacks Mincheol again and leaves. She is angry that he would bring something from the past up, and once she leaves, she realizes touching someone's ears is a very sensual thing. 1 week later, Jia is going to job interviews, and Mincheol says good luck before she leaves. Jia has been too lucky throughout her life, but her struggle to get a job starts now. However, Jia is crossing the road when suddenly, truck appears. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Two birds are reading a piece of paper. It says that a long time ago, in a small village, there was an honest lumberjack and an angel who could not return to heaven because she lost her winged robe. Life was going good until one day, the lumberjack hears the angel calling for him while he is cutting down a tree. The angel found her robe while cleaning the house. The angel is excited, but the lumberjack is horrified. The angel continues by saying that the robe was hidden right under their noses because it was at the back of the closet. She rhetorically asks who could have possibly put it there. The lumberjack puts his head down in shame, for he is the one who hid the robe. He did it because angels can't fly back to heaven without it, so they are forced to live in the human world. The lumberjack thought he was clever by stealing it while the angel was taking a bath. But the angel knew the lumberjack's scheme from the very beginning. She could have taken the robe out of the closet the moment it was put there, but she didn't. Because the angel knows, she starts to tease the lumberjack. The angel playfully suggests that the lumberjack hid the robe so she would be forced to live with the lumberjack. But simple teasing is too much for the lumberjack to handle, and he admits to it. The lumberjack profusely apologizes and justifies it by saying it was all in the name of love. The angel is shocked that the lumberjack admitted it without any protest. But instead of leaving, she has other plans. If he does her one favor, he will be forgiven. The favor is whenever they are together, the lumberjack can't wear his glasses. The lumberjack is shocked because he can't see without them. Then, the angel accidentally drops his glasses into the water, meaning that the lumberjack can't use them anymore. She continues by calling the lumberjack clueless. The angel has been dropping hints that she doesn't like his glasses, and he just hasn't picked up on it. The robe is irrelevant to the situation since she doesn't plan on going back to heaven anyway. As long as he gets rid of his glasses, she will stay with him. Then, the angel puts her hands on the lumberjack's cheeks and starts to slowly lean toward him, almost as if they are going to kiss. Before their lips touch, the great mountain spirit suddenly comes out of the water with 2 pairs of glasses and asks which one belongs to the lumberjack. Suddenly, Gia screams neither of them and wakes up in a hospital bed. She did not become an isekai protagonist. She is flustered that it was all a dream and is confused why she had such a strange dream. The story of the lumberjack and the angel ends with them starting a business of selling sticky rice cakes to tigers. Gia calls her mother to inform her of the accident. She is horrified, but Gia reveals that it wasn't really an accident. Truck-kun stopped right in front of her and barely grazed her. She is unhurt, but she did faint, which could be attributed to being tired since she is job hunting. The doctor told Gia to inform her guardian of the accident, but her mother points out that Mincheol is her guardian and asks what he said about it. Gia is shocked. She thought her guardian was still her mom. Upon looking up the definition of guardian, Gia discovers that Mincheol is her guardian now. Suddenly, Mincheol appears next to Gia covered in sweat and asks if she is okay. Gia is confused why he is here, but Mincheol says that her mother called him. Then, Mincheol notices a man talking to the doctor in the distance and approaches him. Mincheol towers over the man and menacingly asks if he is the one who hurt his wife. Gia is shocked. She never knew Mincheol could make a face like that. Upon seeing Mincheol, the man bows down and apologizes for what he's done. The doctor tells Mincheol to calm down so they can discuss his family members' symptoms. When Gia hears, she remembers that Mincheol and her are now family. This means that Mincheol is there whenever she needs him. Mincheol confirms Gia is okay, but instead of leaving, he continues to ask if Gia is okay and wants to stay with her. Eventually, Mincheol leaves to go back to work, but she wishes that Mincheol would have stayed with her longer. Gia is now walking in the hospital and needs to focus on getting a job. Suddenly, she runs into Yenduek. Gia explains that she fainted because she almost got hit by a truck-kun, and Yenduek asks where Gia is going while walking toward his sports car. Whenever Gia sees a sports car, she knows how much it costs and doesn't dare to walk near it. She always wondered what type of people drive those types of cars. Now she knows. As they are going, Gia's hair is in her face, and Yenduek is coughing. He says that perhaps he should have used one of his other cars, and Gia is shocked that he has another car. Yenduek reveals that he has several cars, but they are all rentals. Gia thought he had won the lottery because how else could he afford them? But Yenduek says that he already won the lottery. Gia is intrigued, but then Yenduek reveals that he hit the jackpot when he ran into Gia. Gia is angry that he keeps using cheap pickup lines. Yenduek gets serious and asks why Gia is dressed in a suit. Gia says that she was on her way to an interview because she needs money, and Yenduek is speechless. Yenduek points out that Gia got a lot of money from her days as an author and asks if she already used it all up. Not wanting to reveal what actually happened, Jia just says that a lot of things happened recently, and there isn't much left. Yenduek is laughing that the Jia Han is willing to work a job to pay the bills. Before he can continue, Jia flips him off and tells him that she isn't going to write again. Yenduek points out that Jia saying that before he said anything shows that she has the writer spirit in her. Then, Yenduek suggests that Jia work at a cafe. Jia is confused, but Yenduek says that he knows a rich guy who runs one for fun who pays very well even though there aren't many customers. Jia is confused how something like that can exist. But Yenduek hands her his business card and tells Jia to call him if she is interested because he can get her an interview. Jia is now walking home and acknowledges that working at the cafe sounds like a good offer. But she doesn't want to owe Yenduek anything because it would hurt her pride. Then, Jia spots Minchiel standing looking at his phone. She deduces that he has been standing there waiting so they can walk home together. Jia is glad and starts to run toward Minchiel. Jia collides with Minchiel and Minchiel is shocked to see Jia there. Jia playfully asks Minchiel questions regarding him being there. Minchiel just says yes and Jia asks if something is wrong with Minchiel's head since he didn't elaborate. Then, Jia realizes that she is hugging Minchiel in public and everyone is looking at them. Jia backs away, but then Minchiel hugs Jia and asks why she hasn't been answering his calls. Jia's phone was on silent and Minchiel was worried. Jia confirms that she is okay and wants to stop hugging because people are staring. But Minchiel insists they continue for a little long. Minchiel is always so nice to Jia that she feels bad for making him worry. She needs to put her pride aside to prevent Minchiel from worrying. So, she declares that she got a job working at a cafe, which means that she won't be jobless anymore. She will be heading to work tomorrow and she suggests that they go out and celebrate. Jia asks if Minchiel will risk losing all of his gains by having a cheat day today, and Minchiel says yes. Jia is glad to see Minchiel not worrying anymore. Him smiling is much better than seeing him worried. The next day, Jia arrives at the interview, and the owner is surprised Jia is on time. That aside, Jia is shocked because the owner is none other than Yenju. To recap what happened so far, Jia was living a completely normal life. Suddenly, she rediscovered the importance of working, but she didn't like any of the job offers she received so far. Then, she got a call from her old boss who was recruiting her for a job. Jia was suspicious of his offer, but she didn't realize Yenduek would trick her like this. As Jia is trying to figure out what to do, Yenju is reading off her resume. Jia dropped out of college, worked in a call center for 2 years, had a few part-time jobs, but no real work experience. Yenju notices that Jia is distracted and asks what's wrong. Jia doesn't know what to do since she hasn't spoken to Yenju for years. But, Yenju interrupts Jia's thinking by telling her to not worry because she wouldn't have interviewed Jia if she wasn't serious about hiring her. Yenju never thought she would meet Jia again and thinks she has seen enough of her resume. Then, she sees that Jia is married. Yenju is confused and takes off her glasses to confirm she saw it right. Upon closer inspection, she realizes Jia is actually married and is shocked. Jia recalls that Yenju Choi was the person responsible for all the good memories in college. Also, observe how Jia's old hair color is the same as Yenju's current hair color. Maybe this means Yenju hasn't moved on from the past. Yenju is the one who made Jia think that ambition is cool even though Jia had no aspirations. Today, Yenju has written dozens of novels, 3 of which are now TV shows. She only continued to grow after her debut and doesn't need luck like Jia did. But now, she is Jia's boss. Yenju is laughing at how Jia is married. She never imagined that the same girl who stayed up all night reading web novels in Yenju's room would be married. Jia reveals that her husband is her childhood friend and Yenju asks how they got married. Jia avoids the question. To prove that she is actually married, Jia shows her pictures from her honeymoon and Yenju is impressed. Jia thought their conversation would be awkward since they haven't seen each other in years. But it was actually quite pleasant and it feels as if they saw each other yesterday. Jia remembers Yenju always being awkward, but now that she has vast sums of money, perhaps her confidence comes from having enough to spare. It is as if there is a spotlight on Yenju. Before Jia leaves, she asks if it's really okay to be working full-time at the cafe. But, Yenju says it doesn't matter since she's the owner and can do whatever she wants. Jia's first day is on Monday and before her taxi leaves, Jia says it's been nice seeing Yenju. Yenju smiles and tells Jia to get home safe. Jia is now home and celebrating that she got a job. Minchiel is concerned. Yenju is at home and looking at an old picture of her and Jia. She smiles and says that she should be the one thanking Jia, implying she has been playing 4D chess the entire time and this is all part of her master plan. Meanwhile, Gia and Mincheol are blowing out candles on the cake to celebrate. It is now Monday and Gia is being introduced to the staff of Second Cafe. Yenju mentions that Gia and her went to college together. Yenju introduces the rest of the staff to Gia. Siu Lee is one of their top baristas, and if Gia doesn't know what to do, he is the one to ask. The next person is Nari Ju. But they both recognize each other from when Nari was seducing Mincheol at the gym and they are shocked to see each other. Nari turned 25 years old this year and most people think she is narcissistic when she says she has great style and good looks. She wears earbuds without music so that she can hear people comment how good she looks. She even takes a route 10 minutes longer than necessary to show off to the common folk. She also works at Second Cafe, which at first glance seems ordinary, but it is far from it. It offers unmatched benefits and since the last manager left, Nari was next in line to become manager. If she became manager, she would be living a life where she had everything she ever wanted. But Gia is the new manager. If only Gia hadn't shown up, she would have become manager. So, Nari complains to Yenju despite Siu being there longer and contributing far more than her. She demands an explanation since Gia doesn't have a lot of experience in the industry, but Yenju counters by saying she is the owner so she can do whatever she wants, essentially saying skill issue to Nari as an explanation. Regardless, Nari is still outraged and wonders how Gia can have a hot husband and be friends with the famous author. Before things get awkward, Nari apologizes to Gia about what happened at the gym, but Gia doesn't make a big deal out of it and says that it is in the past now so it doesn't matter. Nari is taken aback and thinks Gia not getting mad was cool. Nari still thinks Gia doesn't know the first thing about running a cafe and can't accept her as the manager. Gia asks Nari for help, but Nari is caught off guard and her voice cracks while saying sure. Gia is asking about a recipe and Nari realizes that she doesn't have to actually help Gia. So, she taunts Gia by saying that it's embarrassing that the manager doesn't know this. But, Gia says that's exactly why she's asking so she knows when there are customers. Nari is shocked that Gia isn't flustered. Gia continues to ask questions despite Nari being rude and she realizes that Gia isn't bad looking. Nari gets embarrassed and tells Gia to ask Siu for help while walking away and discreetly flipping off Gia. She thinks Gia is annoying. Soon, an old man arrives and compliments Nari's appearance. She is annoyed that this customer is here of all people. The man asks for Nari's number and when she tries to give him the store number, he gets mad because he spent a lot of money at the cafe. The least Nari could do is give him her number. Nari is annoyed and wishes he came when Siu or the boss was here. Suddenly, Gia appears next to Nari and says that Nari should give him her number since the customer is always right. Nari is shocked. The man is excited that someone finally understands him, and Gia introduces herself as the new manager. Nari doesn't know what to do and can't believe what Gia is doing. Gia is writing something down on paper and hands it to the man, saying that it is the number he wanted. The man is excited because he just wants to take Nari on a drive and get something to eat together. But then he sees the number on the paper. It is 911, the emergency number. The man is outraged and Gia insists that he dial it. The man is angry and the entire cafe is staring at them. Gia suggests that she could dial the number for him, but this only makes the man more mad. The man pulls the classic, "Do you know who I am?" card. Gia uses an no reverse card and asks if the man knows who she is. The man is subdued and calmly says no, wishes them a great day, and leaves. After he leaves, Gia sighs and comments how she almost showed her true colors back there. Nari thanks Gia for her help and asks if Gia is okay because it might cause trouble with the boss or cause rumors. But Gia nonchalantly says that she will cross that bridge when she gets there so there's no need to worry about something that hasn't even happened yet. Even if something happens, she would take full responsibility. Nari jokingly says it's fine as long as Gia takes full responsibility. Nari thought Gia wasn't the type of person to take responsibility and acknowledges that Gia standing up for her was pretty awesome. Then, Nari remembers that Gia is her enemy since she stole Mincheol in her manager position, even though Gia didn't steal Mincheol in the first place. Suddenly, another customer enters the cafe and asks for one hot iced Americano. Gia and Nari are speechless. It is villain number 2, the hot iced lady. She is a villain who occasionally pops up and chews you out if you get her order wrong. The lady continues by saying she wasn't expecting the same qualità and servizio as a cafe in Milano, but them not responding to her is rude. Jia looks frustrated and repeats the lady's order in her weird accent. Then, Jia gives the lady a cup of ice and a hot Americano so she can adjust how much ice she wants. The lady says Jia passes and leaves. Nari is shocked that that's all she had to do to satisfy the lady. Nari also notices that Jia does whatever she wants and seems fun. Jia continues to do strange things such as confronting loud customers and telling them they will take legal action for being too loud. When they complain, Jia calls the boss who gives them a refund and orders them to leave or her lawyers will file a lawsuit. Jia then asks Siyu for salt to cleanse the cafe. After observing Jia, Nari realizes that Jia is someone who makes everyone happy, so no wonder people want to be friends with her. Then, Nari notices Siyu staring at Jia and covers his eyes so she doesn't take Siyu away from her. In a black car, Yenduek asks the hot-iced lady how Jia was. She says that she is disappointed because Jia is clearly not satisfied with working in a cafe. The lady then asks why Yenduek is introducing Jia to her now. The lady is Yomi Na, the CEO of Yomi Entertainment. The cafe is now closed and Jia is saying bye to Nari and Siyu. A lot happened today, but nothing major. But there is one last thing Jia needs to take care of and tells a man with a box over his head to come out because she saw him hiding there for a while. Mincheol is shocked that Jia spotted him because of his perfect disguise, which is casual clothing. They are now walking home and Mincheol is still confused how Jia recognized him because he is wearing very different clothing and had a box on his head. Jia acknowledges that Mincheol put in some effort and asks why he is here, because he doesn't drink coffee and the cafe is out of the way. Mincheol can't think of anything and eventually says that he has a new workout routine, which is walking before going to the gym instead of running at the gym. Jia is surprised because she thought Mincheol was here to pick her up and smirks at Mincheol. Soon, Jia trips and before she hits the floor, she is in her bed with her face in her pillow. Her conversation was going so well until she tripped and fell. She thought she heard a crack from Mincheol's shoulder when he caught her, and she thinks something is wrong because he looked awful at the gym. Jia hopes Mincheol is okay and goes to check on Mincheol. Upon opening the door, she is greeted to Mincheol shirtless. Jia gets embarrassed and backs away, saying she is going to take a walk. But Mincheol is confused and Jia is now sitting in his gaming chair. Mincheol explains that he pulled his shoulder and back muscles when he caught Jia and was just about to put on pain relief patches. Jia is confused how Mincheol was going to put them on since he can barely reach behind himself. But Mincheol insists that he can. First, you lay the patches on the floor. Then, you roll around on the floor until they are stuck to your body. When you stand up, they should be on properly. But, they are not. Jia says she will put them on his back for him. Mincheol insists that he can do it himself. But Jia is already prepping another patch and tells Mincheol to be quiet. As Jia is inspecting Mincheol's back, she realizes nothing has changed since when they were kids. They would always scratch each other's back or apply ointment when it was out of reach. The only difference now is that Mincheol's back is a lot wider. Jia wonders what Mincheol eats to get his back that wide. Now that she thinks about it, she was on his back during the honeymoon. Jia starts to touch Mincheol's back and Mincheol calls out to Jia. Jia stops and Mincheol asks why Jia is rubbing his back. Jia is embarrassed and doesn't have an explanation other than his back is incredibly attractive. Jia saves herself by saying his shoulders are tense and starts massaging them. Mincheol is concerned, but Jia insists that his shoulders are like rocks. Jia is now massaging Mincheol back, and she feels this position can only lead to disaster. Mincheol looks at Jia without his glasses and comments how her nails are digging into his back, which hurts. Jia is embarrassed because Mincheol isn't wearing his glasses and apologizes. Jia continues the massage and acknowledges that she needs to get her mind out of the gutter because it is just a massage. 10 minutes later, Jia's hands hurt because Mincheol's back is massive. Maybe stepping on his back would have been more effective like she used to do for her dad. Regardless, Mincheol thanks Jia for the massage since he can move around just fine now. Jia is glad that Mincheol is happy and starts to head back to her room to sleep. But Mincheol stops her and insists he give Jia a shoulder massage in return. Jia declines in an attempt to escape, saying that she doesn't have any knots. But Mincheol didn't let that slide. Jia is now sitting on the bed as Mincheol is preparing to annihilate Jia's shoulders. Mincheol asks Jia to move her hair to the front and when she does, Mincheol begins his massage. But Jia is nervous for no reason and she thinks Mincheol isn't nervous. Mincheol gently places his hand on Jia's shoulder and Jia makes a noise. Mincheol thinks Jia must be in pain, but the pain is not in her shoulders, it is in her heart. Jia's heart is pounding very fast and loud, and she thinks Mincheol can hear it. Even if he can't hear it, surely he can feel it. But Mincheol doesn't say anything. Did he not pick up on it, or is he pretending he didn't notice? Regardless, the massage continues, and suddenly, Jia screams in pain because Mincheol is pressing too hard. It feels like her shoulders are going to rip off, and Jia tightly grabs Mincheol's arm with her nails and digs into it. This causes Jia to fall down on her back in pain, and when she opens her eyes, Mincheol is over her without his glasses. Jia is embarrassed. More importantly, the angle they are at is problematic. Jia is holding on the bed sheets tightly, as if she is bracing for impact. She is concerned about what underwear she wore today, and can't remember. But then she realizes she wore a matching set to feel more confident at work. Jia is relieved, but then gets embarrassed. Why is she relieved that her underwear isn't mismatched? It's almost as if she is looking forward to doing it with Mincheol. Jia puckers up her lips and waits for Mincheol to kiss her. But Mincheol just stays there and after 10 seconds, she pushes Mincheol off her. Jia is annoyed that Mincheol didn't make a move. Nothing is going right for Jia today. She even messed up opening up a snack. But it wasn't really a failure. But Jia really thought Mincheol would kiss her. Maybe she was the only one expecting to kiss. Jia gets embarrassed at the thought of this. Mincheol and Jia both don't know what to do. But then Mincheol gets up and calls for Jia. Jia asks what's up, and Mincheol hesitates and says that it's not good for her back to sit crouched down. When she sits, she would push her chest out to keep her back healthy. Jia makes her back straight, and Mincheol gives her a thumbs up. Mincheol goes to take a shower despite just putting on the patches. Jia is now laying down on the sofa and is disappointed Mincheol didn't come over to give her a kiss. She thinks she is a fool for falling for stuff like that over and over again, but in reality, Mincheol is frustrated about what happened and is slamming the bathroom walls. He looks completely drained and stares at a pink toothbrush, which is presumably Jia's. Then, he picks it up. Jia is looking at the picture from their honeymoon and thinks Mincheol and her are what people call a trickster couple. Then, Mincheol appears and his sudden appearance scares Jia. Mincheol says he brushed his teeth, and Jia is confused how that's relevant. Mincheol reveals that he ate cucumbers during dinner, and Jia doesn't like the taste of cucumbers, which is why he didn't kiss her. Mincheol asks if he can do it now, and Jia says yes. Then, Mincheol kisses Jia. After kissing once, Mincheol takes off his glasses and continues to kiss Jia. Jia is annoyed that Mincheol is so strict about the rules and thinks he should be more flexible. Suddenly, Mincheol puts his hand on Jia's waist, and Jia is shocked by this. At Jia Han Construction, Miss Emotion tells Miss Reason that Mincheol Construction is on strike again. Miss Reason is annoyed since there's a lot to do. Then, a giant machine appears beside them with Mr. Flexibility from Mincheol Construction in it, who says they should just work. Mr. Flexibility uses his machine to move the dirt while Miss Reason and Miss Emotion are in awe. Jia is shocked that Mincheol is being flexible, but she thinks this is a little too much. Jia thinks Mincheol needs to turn on the blinker before he turns, but he did, and almost a little too much. Jia is impressed, but then realizes Mincheol is a guy, so it was bound to happen. But Jia doesn't know what to do because she didn't think something like this would happen today. Mincheol slides Jia's shirt slightly up and starts to slide his hand in. Before too much happens, a phone buzzes. Mincheol and Jia don't know what to do, and Mincheol goes in for another kiss. But Jia stops him and tells Mincheol to answer the phone. Mincheol goes to answer it, and Jia is embarrassed. Jia is now sleeping and questioning why she said that. If she was drunk, she would have gone for it without hesitation, but she did it sober. She recalls them kissing and gets embarrassed again, and starts violently punching a pillow. Jia questions if she has come to like Mincheol that much and doesn't know when it started. She didn't expect it to happen and starts to question what their relationship is anyway. Jia starts to ponder the possibilities, but is interrupted by Mincheol knocking on the door asking to come in. Jia is confused and lets Mincheol in. Mincheol is on his knees and looks nervous, and Jia is confused about what he is doing. Jia thinks that maybe he wants to continue, but then Mincheol says that his mom is coming over this weekend and asks Jia if that's okay. Jia is shocked. She tries to avoid the question by asking if Mincheol met Jia's mother is coming, but he confirms that his mother will be in town for business this weekend. Mincheol doesn't know why, and they both look uncomfortable. Jia is still awkward around Mincheol's mother. In school, the bell rings and students rush out of the classrooms. This phase is called the stormy period of puberty. This normally happens in middle school and is where you can't control the energy inside you. Everyone wants to stand out, and everything on the lunch menu tastes awful. Jia is ascending the school wall and her friend asks if it's really okay. Jia says it is because they feed prisoners of war better than them, so it's against the Geneva Convention. Jia's friend is concerned about what will happen if they get caught, but Jia says it's worth it. Then, Jia and her friend get caught by a lady holding a baguette and she has already subdued another escaping student. She directs them to get down, and then smacks Jia and her friends behind with the baguette with such force that they can barely stand. This isn't violence. This is merely corporal punishment, and the teacher in charge of it at Jia's school was Minchul's mother. Jia thought she wouldn't be punished since it is Minchul's mother, but she was wrong. She actually used the baguette to punish Jia harder. To be fair, Jia did a lot to deserve punishment back then. But now that teacher is her mother-in-law. Jia is now watching baseball and says it reminds her of the old days. Minchul is confused since he didn't know Jia used to play baseball, but she confirms. Her position was the ball and Minchul's mother was the batter. Then, Minchul's mother, whose name is Jizian Zhang, arrives. They are now in a car and Jia notices that Minchul's mother is extremely healthy and wonders what she eats. Then, Minchul's mother comments how Minchul actually picked her up, which makes her happy even though Minchul's mother declines every time Minchul offers to pick her up. She asks if it was her daughter-in-law's ideas and Jia is confused until she realizes she is the daughter-in-law. Jia confirms that it is her, but since she is the daughter-in-law, she doesn't know how to call Minchul's mother. Jia texts Minchul for help, so naturally Minchul ignores it. Because of this, Jia asks Minchul to look at his texts, but Minchul's mother is concerned that they still call each other by their names. Jia and Minchul are both terrified about what she means by this, and Jia asks her to explain. Minchul's mom is just thinking out loud and says that ever since they talked about getting married, she felt some sort of incompatibility between them. This is a dangerous situation for Jia and Minchul. She continues by saying they were a bit awkward for people who were about to get married. Minchul's mom was always the type to pick up on the little things fast, especially when it came to Jia. Of course she is suspicious because they decided to get married an hour after Minchul got signed up for the dating service. But, Minchul's mom says that maybe she's reading into too much, but points out that newlywed couples would normally not be able to get their hands off each other and Jia and Minchul don't even call each other using pet names, which is strange. Jia diffuses the situation by saying that they only call each other by name occasionally, and Minchul's mom asks what they call each other usually. Jia tries to come up with something and recalls that they always call each other by name. Then, Jia says hey. Minchul's mother is confused that they call each other hey, and Jia looks away in embarrassment. Before Minchul's mom can continue, Jia yells out babe and tells Minchul to check his texts. Jia is embarrassed that she called Minchul babe. Minchul's mom deduces that they call each other babe and Minchul tells Jia to call his mom ma'am, which isn't very helpful. They are now at the apartment and the first round of the visit begins, which is home inspection. Minchul's mom slides her finger on a surface and closely inspects it. Then, she calls for Jia and Jia thinks this is going to be like one of the scenes in a soap opera between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. Then, Jia's mom reveals that she saw a soap opera where the mother-in-law nags the daughter-in-law and wanted to try it out. Jia is relieved but is annoyed about the joke. But, Minchul's mom says that Jia should clean up more since there's a lot of dust. Jia is concerned, but then Minchul's mom says that she's kidding and asks Minchul where she can unpack. Round 1 was a defeat for Jia. Round 2 is lunch. They are eating and Minchul's mom says the food is okay, but it is too sweet for her taste. Jia apologizes and says that her mom made it and she should have tasted it before serving. Next time, she will tell her mom to make it less sweet. But, what Minchul's mom really meant is that it needs more rice to balance it out. This was 4 out of 5 stars thanks to Jia's mom. Round 2 was a close save. Round 3 is clean up and tea. They are all drinking tea, except Minchul who is drinking a protein shake. But since Minchul and his mom aren't talkative and Jia is too nervous to talk, it is silent. Jia doesn't know what to do and believes Minchul's mom isn't convinced their marriage is legitimate. Jia needs to distract her with something. Jia looks at Minchul and gets an idea. She asks if Minchul ever washes his shirt and Jia thinks Minchul's mom immediately got suspicious because Jia called Minchul by his name. But, she is also curious because he always wears that red shirt. Minchul is being targeted and shows them his diverse wardrobe, consisting of exclusively the same red shirt. This is a challenge and today, Jia and Minchul's mom team up to fix his wardrobe. This day will forever be referred to as the first uprising of the Red Devils. During the 2002 World Cup, everyone was cheering, including Jia and Minchul. South Korea made it to the round of 16, and the Red Devil shirts sold like crazy. Almost everyone has one. but Mincheol took it a step further and ordered them in bulk because he thought it was a good deal. Mincheol is being dragged to the clothing store. When they arrive, the employee asks what she can help them with, and Gia and Mincheol's mom say they need help with Mincheol. They go to the men's section, and Gia realizes that even if she gets rid of the red shirts, Mincheol still has checkered shirts which are problematic. She needs to make sure Mincheol doesn't buy more of those. Suddenly, Mincheol's mom is fascinated by the vast array of checkered shirts. Gia now understands why he has so many of them, because checkered shirts are his mom's style. Mincheol's mom insists he tries them on, but Mincheol doesn't want to. She then asks Gia what color she likes, and she says both look fine despite not wanting either of them. Gia recently discovered why Mincheol's wardrobe is so bad. Firstly, he is an engineer, which means he prioritizes comfortability over everything else. Gia thought this was the only reason until now. Mincheol's mom likes checkered pattern shirts and pressures him into buying them. Gia doesn't understand why she likes check patterns. Maybe it's because she needs a graph on her fur when she scratches it. Despite their disinterest, the store employee loves the idea of Mincheol getting a checkered pattern shirt. This is likely to make the customer buy it. The employee asks what Mincheol does for work, and when he answers, she says the clothes suit him well. She even mentions their 3+3 event, but Gia doesn't care. She gives Mincheol some clothes to try on. When he does, the store employee is impressed because Mincheol looks very hot. Gia is impressed and thinks this is the bare minimum for Mincheol's wardrobe. It would be great if he dressed well, but Mincheol looks drained. Then, Mincheol's mom calls Gia, using the word daughter-in-law, and comments how the outfits are too plain, and suggests he tries the checkered shirts. The employee is shocked upon hearing that Gia is the daughter-in-law. Gia is confused why the employee isn't stepping in to help and is nowhere near them. She is actually now behind the counter taking a call, and Gia thinks it's because the employee is trying to avoid an argument. But the employee was probably interested in Mincheol and doesn't want to get involved now that she knows he is married. Mincheol's mom asks which side he agrees with, and he doesn't know. Upon careful consideration, Mincheol masterfully avoids the question by saying that all he cares about is comfort, and they are both comfortable. They then go to buy the clothes, and Gia acknowledges that not arguing was the best option and thinks he's grown a little. But Gia really would have preferred if Mincheol took her side. Then, Mincheol whispers into Gia's ear that he actually liked the ones she chose better. Gia is shocked and Mincheol is avoiding eye contact. Gia is glad and thinks that Mincheol said that so her feelings didn't get hurt. Then, Gia says that Mincheol won't get brownie points for complimenting her while pounding on his back. But then Gia realizes that Mincheol's mom saw them, and Mincheol's mom looks embarrassed. She tells them that this is a public space and turns around in embarrassment. Seeing her reaction gives Gia an idea. Gia tells Mincheol that they are going to make his mom less suspicious of their marriage and tells him the plan. They meet back up with Mincheol's mom, and Gia and Mincheol are wearing matching couple shirts. Mincheol's mom coughs in disbelief, and Gia justifies it by saying they were on sale. Gia came up with this plan because she remembered that her parents tend to show affection toward each other in public. Whenever they did this, Mincheol's mom got embarrassed, which means that she can't deal with romance. Gia's plan is foolproof. They just need to excessively flirt in front of Mincheol's mom, and she will stop being suspicious. So, Gia starts by calling out Mincheol and telling to walk slower in a cute manner. Mincheol is confused, and suddenly, he turns into a rooster. But the plan works since Mincheol's mom is too embarrassed to say anything. Gia is glad. They are now at a dessert cafe, and Gia tells Mincheol to say ah as she is holding a spoonful of the dessert. Mincheol insists that he can feed himself, but Gia puts the spoon in Mincheol's mouth anyway. But the plan is not flawless since acting all lovey-dovey too quickly is suspicious, so this is a huge gamble. While feeding Mincheol, she gets some on his cheek and decides to wipe it with her finger and eat it. Gia is not giving Mincheol's mom a break from her insanity. But Gia doing this alone isn't enough to clear suspicions. She needs Mincheol to cooperate and asks him to help do something couple-like. So, Mincheol tries to feed Gia and calls her a little birdie. Gia and Mincheol's mom are shocked. He went a little too far. They continued this until they got home. Mincheol's mom acknowledges that they are very close and suggests she leave so as to not intrude. But Gia insists she stays a few nights. But Mincheol's mom insists she leaves, which means Gia's operation was a huge success. Suddenly, it starts raining, so Mincheol's mom needs to stay the night. Gia and Mincheol are now in the same room and are getting ready to sleep. Gia suggests she sleeps on the floor, but Mincheol says no and insists they sleep together because they are married. Gia is embarrassed, but as they are getting into bed, Mincheol's mom peeks through the door and asks them to come out. Upon seeing them in bed, Minchul's mom thinks they are about to partake in spicy relations and says she'll be back in the morning. But Jia confirms that it's not like that. 15 minutes earlier, Jia and Minchul are in another room and Minchul's mom asks why there's a bed in a room that isn't Minchul's. Jia is nervous that they are going to get caught since they actually sleep in separate beds. Before Jia can make up an excuse, Minchul says he sleep talks and moves around while sleeping, which made Jia uncomfortable, so he bought a bed for Jia a few days ago so she can sleep well. Jia is impressed by Minchul taking initiative and giving a sensible answer for once. She never would have thought the dense muscle-head gamer who only cares about not losing his gains could be so sensible. Minchul's mom seems somewhat convinced until she points out that the bed looks well used, which is a contradiction, and asks if they bought it second-hand. Jia and Minchul are shocked. Back to the present, Jia is still worried that Minchul's mom caught onto their scheme even though they are sharing a room. But then Minchul's mom said she read something interesting recently and asks if they heard of a show Widow Couple. She says she will send it to them later, wishes them good night and leaves the room. Jia and Minchul are now alone and decided to sleep together for the first time. Minchul suggests that he leaves now that his mom left, but Jia knows that they must sleep in the same bed to avoid suspicion. Minchul suggests they sleep in opposite directions to maximize their space and comfort, but Jia doesn't like it, so they sleep in the same direction. They are back to back, which is embarrassing, but it would look like they are a real couple if Minchul's mom walks in. As this is happening, Minchul's mom is holding an envelope in her room. The only problem now is that Jia can feel everything Minchul does, like his heartbeat and his breathing because of their position. Jia is embarrassed, but then she sees Minchul shaking with his hand in a weird position and asks if Minchul is unwell. Minchul says that he's not sick, but when he sleeps on his side, his head doesn't match the pillow height because his shoulders are so jacked. But Minchul says it's fine because he will get used to it. Suddenly, Minchul apologizes for speaking up when his mom asked about the bed. To his surprise, Jia says that he did well because her mind went blank during that situation. Jia is glad, and she tells Minchul to lie down on his back so he is comfortable. Minchul is confused, but then Jia rests her head on his arm. If she does this, they can be comfortable and save space. But Jia is now bored and decides to quiz Minchul. Jia says she wants something from Minchul and asks Minchul to guess as she is repeatedly touching his chest. Minchul asks if he can have a guess, but Jia says no and says that he gets 3 points if he gets it right. Minchul thinks he figured it out and says that Jia wants a savings account with 1 billion won. The money would also be clean, so she doesn't have to call Saul Goodman to launder the money. This answer is tempting, but Jia says it's wrong. Minchul is confused, but Jia says it's something he can give her right now as a hint. Minchul asks if it is chicken feet. Jia says no. He says if she wants Minchoko. Jia threatens to murder Minchul. Jia is frustrated and says that Minchul is pretending to be stupid. Suddenly, Minchul's arms start to wrap around Jia and Jia panics. Minchul is now hugging Jia and Jia is embarrassed and shocked. Jia asks why he is doing this and Minchul responds by asking if this is what she wanted from the start. But Jia is too embarrassed to answer and Minchul keeps asking until Jia says that he is right and holds on to Minchul. Minchul is glad, but Jia doesn't know what to make of the situation. Minchul is smooth, but Jia's plan was to make fun of him before bed for fun. But Minchul's reaction was different than expected. Minchul then looks at Jia and touches her ear. Jia is shocked and doesn't know why he is doing this. Jia is concerned that Minchul wants to engage in a loud spicy activity and doesn't know what to do since Minchul's mom is in the next room. Jia thinks this is going too fast until she realizes that Minchul put an earplug in her ear. Minchul did this so Jia could sleep in peace, but Jia is confused what he means by this. Minchul says that Jia is scared of lightning, but Jia is confused how it is relevant and denies it. Minchul is confused because she flinches every time there is lightning because it is raining. But Jia thinks that she was like that because of Minchul's actions. Minchul continues saying that if she isn't scared, then why did she say that Minchul was right when he hugged her? After pondering the question, Jia gets embarrassed because she knows it was really because Minchul hugged her. Then Jia admits that she is very scared of the lightning and buries her head into Minchul's chest. Minchul thinks his guess was correct. Immediately after, he puts his sleeping mask on and wishes Jia good night. Jia thinks Minchul is sly like a fox. He is extremely dense sometimes, but also does what Jia subconsciously wants and she can't predict it. Moments later, Jia realizes that Minchul is just dense. He is giving her a bear hug while sleeping and Jia is trapped. She tries to escape, but Minchul's power even when asleep is simply too much to handle. If she moves the wrong way, she will be split in half. Jia calls out to Minchul to wake up, but he continues to hug her. In the morning, Minchul's mom is drinking a liquid and sees Mouse, Minchul's cat, attempting to enter a room. When Minchul's mom lets Mouse in, she looks inside to see Minchul and Jia peacefully sleeping in unorthodox positions and not even being covered by the sheets. Minchul's mom leaves the room. Later in the morning, Jia is awake and is staring down the meal Minchul's mom made, which is rice with various side dishes. Looking at such a display makes Jia's stomach upset. This is bad. Jia didn't get enough sleep. They are now eating and Jia thinks this is a scene right out of a morning drama. She anticipates she will get scolded and slapped with kimchi, but Minchul's mom probably won't go that far. Minchul's mom sees Jia isn't eating and asks if what's wrong and suggests that it isn't to Jia's liking. Jia says that she is fine, but she thinks that she will upset her stomach if she doesn't eat it. Then, Minchul comments how Jia's eyes are red and asks if Jia is not sleeping. Jia says that she is like this due to Minchul's terrible sleeping habits. Suddenly, Minchul's mom asks Jia if she can make time after they eat so they can talk one-on-one. Jia is shocked and doesn't know what Minchul's mom wants to say to her. Jia and Minchul's mom are now walking outside and Jia tries to figure out why she is here. She thinks they acted like a lovey-dovey couple, but they are against a formidable enemy, so maybe she could sense that Jia was just acting and that she has been caught. Minchul's mom stops and presents Jia with an envelope. Jia is confused, but then Minchul's mom clarifies that it is money, similar to what mother-in-laws do for daughter-in-laws in dramas. She tells Jia to do something with Minchul and she will give her more if she needs it. She is probably referring to divorce, but it isn't clear. Jia asks if she is joking and attempts to get out of the situation. Minchul's mom says she was kidding and Jia is confused. Minchul's mom wanted to joke around to lighten the mood since Jia seemed tense. Jia thinks it's hard to tell when Minchul's mom makes a joke. Jia is confused about what's inside the envelope and Minchul's mom tells her to look inside. Their marriage contract is inside and Jia is shocked. Minchul's mom says that she wasn't specifically looking for it, but she couldn't sleep and thought she would just give them some pocket money and leave. But then, she wanted to see their wedding photos and found it while searching for them. She asks Jia if she and Minchul have a sham marriage. Jia is shocked and knows that their operation has been compromised. Jia tries to cover it up by saying it's not what it looks like, a typical move that clearly indicates that it's exactly what it looks like. But, Jia knows that their execution was sloppy. They should have hit it somewhere harder to find than behind their wedding pictures. Jia doesn't know what to do since Minchul's mom has hard evidence of what they did. Jia thinks she is screwed. But then, Minchul's mom reveals that it's fine because she knew about it from the start. Jia is confused. Minchul's mom tells Jia to look at it from her perspective. Minchul came home on New Year's and she signed him up for a marriage matchmaker. Only 2 hours later, he brought over a girl that he decided to marry, and the girl just happened to be Jia, someone Minchul knew his entire life. Of course it was suspicious, but Minchul's mom is glad that he married Jia because deep down, she had always wished for this outcome. Minchul's mom tells Jia to take good care of Minchul and says that she will cheer them on. Jia is confused because she thought Minchul's mom was going to break them up since she knew that their marriage was a sham. But Minchul's mom sees no point in breaking up a perfectly functioning couple. If Jia and Minchul wanted to break up, then they should figure that out for themselves since they are adults. Jia didn't realize this until now. Minchul's mom was concerned about their relationship before visiting, but after seeing them in action, she is relieved to see that they are both happy. She is also relieved to see that Jia is the same person she knew a long time ago. Jia is taken aback by this. Minchul's mom is now in a taxi and comments how dealing with her must have been tiring. Jia denies this. Before she leaves, Minchul's mom says that she wants their firstborn to be a daughter. Jia is embarrassed and Minchul's mom leaves. Jia and Minchul survived Minchul's mom's visit despite being a fake couple. They even got pocket money, which makes it seem like they scammed Minchul's mom. Regardless, Jia and Minchul compliment each other on how they did well. Suddenly, Minchul asks if he can ask Jia something. Jia doesn't respond, but Minchul asks his question anyway. He asks Jia if his mother said anything weird. As Jia ponders this, she recalls how she told Minchul's mom that their marriage isn't loveless because she has fallen for Minchul. Minchul's mom thought this was just an act, but Jia insisted that it is real. Instead of answering Minchul's question, she starts vigorously pounding on Minchul's back and realizes that this needs to be done now. Jia asks Minchul if they should start going out for real. Minchul is confused. Jia attempts to justify it by saying that to avoid situations like this where they have to act like a lovey-dovey couple, they should just become a real couple. Suddenly, Minchul grabs Jia's hand and says that he is fine with becoming a real couple. But the reason why he wants to is not for Jia's reason. Minchul pins Jia to the wall and declares that he likes Jia and says they should go out. Jia is confused and asks if Minchul likes her romantically, and Minchul nods his head to confirm this. Jia asks when he started to feel this way and Minchul says not since when, even now, which means that he has probably liked Jia for a long time. Jia is confused by this and Minchul just says that he likes Jia now. Jia looks away and is embarrassed. Then she says that if Minchul really likes her, then if he kisses her in the next 5 seconds, she will determine how to move forward. Minchul is shocked and is concerned that they are doing this in public. Jia gets embarrassed and comments that Minchul already slammed her against the wall and held her hands, so it does matter. If Minchul kisses her in the next 5 seconds, they will start going out. Jia starts counting down from 5 and Minchul is leaning in to kiss Jia. But before he can do it, a female enters the elevator they are in and Minchul and Jia separate. The female is confused and then realizes what is happening, so she starts to leave the elevator. But Jia stops her saying that it's not like that even though it is exactly like that. They are riding the elevator, and the female is sweating profusely. Due to the awkward atmosphere, it feels like the elevator is going very slowly. Jia attempts to calm down and reflect on what just happened. What she did was too fast. Her sense of judgment is off today. Suddenly, Minchul taps on Jia's shoulder and directs her to look at her phone. Minchul texted her if it's fine if he kisses her 5 seconds from now since they were interrupted. Jia is shocked and asks Minchul if he is crazy because someone is in front of them. Suddenly, Minchul grabs Jia's shoulder with a single hand and swiftly pulls her toward him. Minchul's mom is in a car and looking through a book containing a picture of Jia and Minchul sleeping together as kids in the same position they were sleeping in last night. She thinks it would be nice if they were more honest with each other. Minchul pulls Jia in and aggressively kisses her. Upon separating, Jia quickly pulls herself back in and intensely kisses Minchul. Jia's forehead hit Minchul's glasses, so after he adjusted those, they continued to kiss. With this, Minchul and Jia are now dating. The female in the elevator with them is disgusted and is going to pretend she didn't see that. During Jia and Minchul's primary school days, there was a doodle drawn on the board implying that Jia and Minchul are in love with each other. 20 years later, the doodle became the truth, and they are now in love with each other. Later at the cafe, Nari asks if Jia has seen a dermatologist recently since her skin is glowing. Jia happily responds by saying that Nari won't get anything out of complimenting her. Jia's aura is emitting a blinding light, but Nari didn't compliment Jia, she just wants to know which place Jia went to. Then, Nari realizes that perhaps Jia's expression is what actually changed and suggests that Jia engaged in intense adult activities with Minchul. Jia gets embarrassed and tells Nari to do her job. To defend herself, Nari clings to Siyu for protection and comments how the more Jia denies it, the more true it is. Jia didn't know her expression changed that much. This is probably because Minchul has been bringing her gifts after he comes home from work. Having someone think about her and share her happiness with is the best feeling. However, every day after work, Minchul continues to bring home large displays of food as a gift. Jia accepts them, but is not impressed. It is too much food. Even Mouse agrees that it is too much. Jia knows that Minchul enjoys bringing her gifts, but she doesn't want to kill Minchul's vibe because he is doing it out of love for her. Jia spots the scale in the distance and upon stepping on it, a beam of light comes out of the apartment, indicating that the Jia has gained weight. Minchul is now banned from bringing food on his way back from work. Minchul is confused, but Jia says that if he continues to bring her food, she will gain weight. Then she corrects herself saying that she already gained weight. Minchul comments how everything has 0 calories if you enjoy it. But Minchul didn't even eat any of the food. He has been too busy trying to not lose his gains by eating chicken breast. So Jia suggests that Minchul get her something other than food if he is going to get a gift. Minchul points out how Jia once said that she prefers consumable items rather than novelty items and Jia is shocked he remembered. But Minchul concedes and says he will get something else, like flowers. Jia is fine with this as long as it's not very often. Minchul returns from work the next day with a massive array of flowers. Jia is taken aback by this. Minchul technically did exactly what Jia said to do because they are flowers. Minchul asks Jia what's wrong, and Jia asks Minchul why he bought it. Minchul justifies it by saying that Jia said flowers were okay, and since bigger is better, he bought that. Mincheol noticed they were on sale, but Jia says the price isn't the problem. It's the scale of the gift. Jia sits down and points out to Mincheol that his gifts are a burden. Mincheol is confused, but Jia says that it got annoying after the first 2 times. She is grateful for them because they are gifts, but they are too much and made Jia think if she got in a relationship only to receive gifts. Mincheol understands and apologizes. Jia says he doesn't have to apologize and asks why Mincheol got her so many gifts in the first place. Mincheol says that he did it to make her happy, and Jia says that is exactly the problem. Jia doesn't want gifts, she wants Mincheol, but doesn't finish her sentence. Upon hearing what she just said, Jia gets embarrassed and walks away saying that buying gifts is banned. But, before she can leave, Mincheol grabs her arm and he tells her to finish her sentence. Jia clarifies by saying that there are other ways Mincheol can make Jia happy other than buying her gifts. So, Mincheol asks what these things are. Jia is confused, but Mincheol clarifies that Jia said she wants something from him other than gifts. Mincheol seductively grabs Jia's hand and says that he must know this critical information so he doesn't make the mistake again. Jia and Mincheol blankly stare at each other until Jia grins and says that Mincheol is amazing. Mincheol is confused, but Jia gets angry that Mincheol is pretending to know again. She continues by saying that recently, Mincheol pretends to not be aware of the situation and uses this to mess with her. Jia takes Mincheol's glasses off his face and puts it on her face, saying that Mincheol is acting all high and mighty. Mincheol is still confused and asks Jia to clarify. He asks if he did something wrong, and Jia says no while putting his glasses back on his face. As Jia is walking away, she says that she is actually complimenting Mincheol and gives him 80 to Jia points today, which means that he needs to try harder next time. Mincheol is confused what Jia points are, and Jia stops in her tracks and is shocked that she needs to explain such a simple concept to higher life form like Mincheol. Jia explains that it is a rating for how close she was to falling for Mincheol a second time. Jia then answers Mincheol's previous question by saying that Mincheol doesn't need to overthink it and should just act natural. This is enough to make Jia happy. Jia then heads into the room to go to bed, and Mincheol is left speechless on the couch. Mincheol proceeds to intensely investigate his hand and recalls holding hands with Jia while asking himself what his usual self really is. Jia is on the other side of the door and immediately leans back on the door in embarrassment for making that speech. She tried to act all tough and couldn't be honest with herself. Jia was the one who wasn't acting naturally. But, Jia thinks Mincheol is a fool because if he pushed a little harder, the situation could have gotten spicy. Suddenly, Mincheol opens the door without knocking and pushes Jia on the floor in the process. Mincheol came to say that he thought about it and understood what Jia meant when she told him to act like his usual self and asks Jia if she is referring to the thing they do that has the letters X. Mincheol is standing with a stone-cold expression, but Jia is confused until she realizes Mincheol is referring to spicy time. Jia realizes that she made a fatal mistake by giving Mincheol space and decides she needs to take back control of the situation. So naturally, Jia looks away from Mincheol and says that Mincheol can do whatever he wants. Mincheol is confused by Jia's reaction, but Jia just accepts it and will worry about it after it's done. Mincheol suggests they head to the location now. Suddenly, they are at the gym while Jia is squatting and Mincheol is cheering her on. Jia realizes that Mincheol was referring to exercise. Exercise technically is the usual, so this shouldn't be a surprise. But, Jia is struggling because she has been slacking off due to work. They are now headed back home and Jia is riding Mincheol's back because she took leg day too far. But, even now, Jia is still happy and doesn't regret dating Mincheol. The next day, Suyin is traversing the streets while eating a Choco Taco when she sees Sang-yu walking with a female who is wrapped around his arm. Suyin stops in her tracks at this sight and starts having a panic attack, so severe that she drops her Choco Taco. Suyin is now in the car with Sang-yu and she thinks that he has been suspicious lately. She feels like Sang-yu is watching her closely, and he is hiding his phone for some reason. Suyin asks Sang-yu about his dinner plans, and he reveals that he already has plans with a certain person he is indebted to. The person he is indebted to was this mysterious woman from the start. Suyin is irritated and puts her contaminated Choco Taco into the garbage. Suddenly, Suyin and the woman make eye contact and Suyin attempts to hide to not get caught. But, the woman didn't seem to notice since she didn't have a reaction and just kept walking. More importantly, Suyin notices that they are very close and she thinks they are maybe old friends. Suyin's heart drops at the thought of this and hopes they are just friends. Suyin has hope that Sang-yu isn't the type of person to cheat on her and she rushes down the road to catch up. Sang-yu and the woman are together, and he thanks her for her help and refers to her as his sister, so she is probably one of his 3 sisters. But the woman says that her time isn't free and recalls that Sang-yu promised to take care of her today. Sang-yu bows to her and asks where their next location is. The woman is flattered. They are now eating and Suyin is close by and spying on them. But this wasn't intentional. She just happened to run into them. The woman asks Sang-yu how the food is and repeatedly asks if it's yummy. But Sang-yu is struggling from how spicy the food is and is drinking water to cope. The woman says that Sang-yu is still a child, and he thinks she is drunk. But Sang-yu has never seen the woman drunk, and she references the time Sang-yu passed out without pants on the street. She continues by aggressively wiping Sang-yu's face. This made Suyin uncomfortable, so she fled the scene. This wasn't the woman's intention because she wanted Suyin to confront her, but she didn't. Suyin is walking and she is frustrated because Sang-yu told her that he is with a friend. But that woman was clearly not just a friend because they were too close. Suyin thinks maybe Sang-yu has been lying to her about how he loves her this whole time. But Suyin aggressively slaps her cheeks and decides she won't be mad until she knows exactly what's going on. But first, she must eat. As Suyin is eating macarons, Sang-yu and the woman appear. They appear everywhere Suyin goes, and she suspects the woman is predicting where she is going. Soon, the woman enters the bathroom and Suyin is standing there waiting for her. She tells the woman to tell her whatever she wants to tell her instead of following her around all day. The woman stands there smiling and is confused. Suyin continues by saying that it seems like the woman has been following her. The woman asks if Suyin knows her from a wedding or birthday, and notes that she has a hard time memorizing faces. But Suyin confirms that it's their first time meeting. Then the woman comes to the realization that this is because of Sang-yu. Suyin is confused how she knows him, but the woman says that every day, they used to eat together and slept under the same roof. Suyin is shocked and the woman asks how Suyin knows him. Suyin looks at the ground and says he's just a work colleague. The woman understands and asks how Sang-yu is adapting to the job. But Suyin ignores the question and declares that she is Sang-yu's girlfriend. The woman is astonished and they meet up with Sang-yu, who is mad that the woman would mess with Suyin like that. But she was just enjoying herself. But she still apologizes to Suyin. The woman introduces herself as Sang-yu's oldest sister, Yenji Choi. Suyin also introduces herself. Yenji ponders the situation and then says that Suyin is her sister-in-law. Suyin is shocked and Yenji asks if she can call Suyin sister-in-law because she is her brother's girlfriend. Suyin agrees. Yenji has a lot to ask Suyin, but that is not today's problem, and she leaves. Suyin respectively bows to her and Sang-yu flips her off. Suyin and Sang-yu are walking together, and Sang-yu apologizes because his sisters always mess with him. Suyin understands, but Sang-yu is confused why Suyin is here in the first place because she worked from home today. Suyin lies and says that she needed to buy something and her eyes met with Yenji by chance. Sang-yu changes the topic by saying that he needed his sister's help and then apologizes. Suyin thinks it's about Yenji, but he is apologizing for something else. Sang-yu has been hesitating telling Suyin about this and doesn't know if it's the right choice. Suyin is devastated. She immediately thinks it's the worst case scenario and thanks Sang-yu for everything. They have been dating for a few weeks and she has been happy, but it didn't work out. Suyin starts crying but Sang-yu stops her. Suyin asks if Sang-yu has been avoiding her and he says no. Then Sang-yu musters up some courage and presents Suyin with a jewelry box. This is to show that Sang-yu and Suyin are lovers. Suyin is shocked and Sang-yu asks if she will accept it. It is assumed that she accepted. Back to Mincheol and Jia. They have just returned and Mincheol notes that Jia worked hard in the gym today, so he wanted to give her a reward. The reward is a surprise attack and he tases Jia. This is supposed to be a pun in Korean. Reward and fatal wound contain the same symbol. Suddenly, Jia wakes up from this dream and wonders why she dreams about weird stuff after leg day. Jia is walking and is in immense pain because it's been a while since she last worked out and Mincheol worked her too hard yesterday. This is going to affect her work. Suddenly, Mincheol appears in front of Jia with wet hair and no glasses. Jia admires Mincheol's hot appearance and he is confused why Jia is like that. Jia is questioning if Mincheol has always been this handsome. While Mincheol is making a chicken breast smoothie, he asks if Jia wants protein powder, but she says she's fine with the normal chicken breast smoothie. Jia now realizes that Mincheol has always been handsome when he isn't wearing his glasses. Jia recalls something about when Mincheol was young, and she comes to a profound realization. Mincheol thinks Jia's change in expression means she wants protein powder, but she doesn't and chugs her chicken breast smoothie. Jia recalls that Mincheol was pretty good looking when he was younger. When they were in elementary school, Jia applied makeup to Mincheol. After they were done, Mincheol washed it off and Jia felt bad even though it was practice for the talent show. Mincheol leaves the bathroom and Jia apologizes and tells him to not be mad, but Mincheol isn't mad. Jia continues to apologize and says that it was her first time seeing him without glasses and he was cuter than expected, so she couldn't help herself. Mincheol takes offense to this and says to not call him cute. Since he's a guy, Jia should call him handsome. Mincheol wonders why even his family think he looks cute without glasses. Jia thinks this is funny and then says that Mincheol looks manly with his glasses on. She makes fun of Mincheol by saying that people call him cute because of his big eyes and long eyelashes, but he covers them up with glasses which look manlier. Mincheol asks if this is really true and Jia says no. Back to the present, Jia realizes that interaction was more important than she realized. So, she asks Mincheol if he is wearing his glasses to look cool. Mincheol is confused, but Jia says she is asking because he has been wearing the same glasses since he was little. Mincheol says he wears them because they are comfortable and very practical since he stares at a computer all day. Also, the big lenses put less stress on the eyes, and he has anti-blue light lenses for additional help. Jia is disappointed and thinks that her comment didn't drastically change Mincheol's life. Jia and Mincheol are now outside and part ways to go to work. As Mincheol is walking, he recalls the same scene as a child Jia was thinking about and smiles about it, indicating that he wears his glasses to look manly. Regardless, Jia would still like Mincheol to not wear glasses. Nari sees Jia thinking about this and asks what's wrong. Then, Jia notices something and is shocked. Nari is reading one of her books. When Jia published her first book, she appeared at a bookstore and bought it. Everyone at the bookstore was also there to buy her book. After, Jia ran home celebrating her accomplishment and the bag rips, making her books go flying. Back to the present, Jia is wondering why Nari is reading her book. She wonders if the book is even still on sale and thinks it's just a coincidence that she's reading it. But, even after all these years, seeing someone reading her book is still embarrassing. Jia wants to know what she thinks, so she nervously asks Nari how the book is. Nari is scared by Jia's face, and she says the book sucks. Jia is shocked. She says it's cringe and reads like a teenager wrote it but is also a fun read. Jia blushes from hearing this, and she asks Nari why she is reading it. Nari says she's reading it for her book report. Jia is confused and Nari explains that it's the cafe's best benefit. The boss handpicks a book every Monday and puts it on a bulletin board. If you write a report about it and hand it in, you get 100,000 won immediately. Jia is shocked. Nari continues by saying that if you turn in a report every week for a year, the boss will pay for a vacation. Jia is confused why Yenju would do this, but Nari explains that it helps the boss with her writing and she wants people to read her favorite works. The report needs to be 500 words excluding spaces. There are 4 weeks in a month, so she can make 400,000 won extra per month. Jia is skeptical and asks Nari if this is an April Fool's joke. But Nari asks Jia why she would lie about it and says the boss will even buy the books for you. After work, Jia and Mincheol are walking home and Mincheol asks if something happened at work today because Jia's expression looks bad. Jia asks Mincheol if he could get 100,000 won for writing a book report. Would he do it? Mincheol thinks it is a scam, but Jia says it's not. Mincheol does the math and says that that is 200 won per word. This is enticing, but Jia should be cautious because maybe it is a pyramid scheme. This makes Jia feel stupid, so she kicks Mincheol. At home, Jia picks up her book and she feels bad about it, but it is too good to refuse. Jia feels guilty about this because she told Yenju that she won't write anymore. But it's fine because it's just a report. Jia's former selves assemble and her former self angrily points out that writing a report is still writing. But Jia tells her former self to shut up and thinks that if Yenju gets mad at her, she can just apologize. Jia starts writing and quickly finishes and sends it over. Immediately after, Jia was sent 100,000 won and she leaves the room to show Mincheol it's not a scam, but he still thinks it's a pyramid scheme. Yenduek and Yenju are drinking wine and he's surprised Yenju got Jia to write again. Yenduek thinks a book report isn't exactly writing, but Yenju points out he never specified what type of writing he wanted Jia to do. Regardless, Yenduek is impressed that Jia's book report is exactly in her style. It's casual and sucks you in. He's also surprised Yenju pulled this off for only 100,000 won, but she points out it wasn't the money that did this. She created an atmosphere that was comfortable and where Jia could make her own rules. Here, she could put her passion onto paper and share it with her colleagues. This eventually will bring writing back into Jia's daily life. Yenduek thinks Yenju spent a long time planning this out, but instead of answering it, she asks if Jia writing makes him happy. Yenduek says that Jia's writing is strangely funny, but points out that the one who likes Jia's writing more than him is Yenju. Yenduek thinks Yenju has been influencing Jia's life from the side, but Yenju says it's none of his concern and it's time to deal with their bet. The bet was if Yenju could get Jia to write, Yenduek had to drink anything she gave him. Yenduek denies this, but when Yenju threatens to cancel her book deal, he instantly agrees. Before he starts, he asks Yenju if it's really okay if he does this because if he makes a mistake, it will be her fault. Yenju ignores the question and tells Yenduek to drink. Yenduek chugs the glass of wine and Yenju applauds him for it. Yenju then gives him some snacks and Yenduek is relieved until he sees an array of strange snacks. Then, Yenju fills his glass back up with wine and tells Yenduek to drink. If he falls asleep before Yenju, he has to come back and do this again. 3 hours later, Yenduek passes out. Yenju is impressed he lasted this long and leans toward him. She touches his hair and then moves his face and mouth. Yenju leans toward Yenduek's lips and almost kisses him, but they are interrupted by the phone ringing. It's a call from Yenduek's son, and Yenju answers the phone. His son instantly recognizes her voice, implying something happened between Yenju and Yenduek in the past. Back to Minchiel and Jia. Jia is cursing out Minchiel while he's flexing. We must go 1 hour in the past to understand how this happened. Jia got the money from the book report and Minchiel is impressed with Jia's work benefits. Minchiel is now playing a famous fighting game and is on a 3-game winning streak and Jia is impressed by Minchiel's character. They have been dating for 2 weeks and being around each other makes them happy, and this is how it should be. But nothing else has really changed. Minchiel is still always gaming, and while Jia doesn't expect him to be romantic, she thinks it would be nice if they acted more like a couple. Then, Jia gets an idea and she challenges Minchiel to a match in the game. Minchiel and Jia are now playing on the sofa and Minchiel has that gamer posture. This is exactly what their relationship needed, and they decide that the loser has to do whatever the winner wants. All Jia needs to do is beat Minchiel a single time. This is a brilliant idea and no matter what happens, it should create a good atmosphere for their relationship. The plan is flawless. Minchiel says that if he wins, they will go jogging. Jia thinks it's a joke because they already exercise a fair amount and she wants it to be something romantic. But Minchiel never jokes about exercise and Jia's plan to spice up their relationship could be ruined if she loses. They are now intensely gaming and Jia thinks Minchiel will go easy on her. But he doesn't and is more focused than before. Jia is very close to winning the round but suddenly, Minchiel one-shots her. Jia decides to cuss out Minchiel and Minchiel emotes on Jia. Jia is devastated, but Minchiel tells her to not feel so bad since he has a massive advantage. But Jia does not admit defeat despite losing 10 games in a row. Minchiel says they have work tomorrow and decides to consider her almost winning a victory. But Jia says no because Minchiel is pitying her, which is worse than before, and says they should play just one more. Minchiel agrees and Jia says she'll know if he loses on purpose. It is now 3:46 a.m. and Jia has lost every match. She insists on going one more round despite Minchiel being visibly exhausted, but he agrees. Jia has discovered the secret to winning. In order to make the game fair, Jia will be sitting on Minchiel's lap. Minchiel is confused because he can't see the screen, but that's the point. They begin playing and Jia's plan is finally working because she is winning. Suddenly, Minchiel picks Jia up by her legs and she is now upside down. The odds are now in Minchiel's favor. To counter this, Jia starts pinching him. After a long-fought battle, Jia wins and has Minchiel in an armbar. Jia celebrates and she wants to hear Minchiel's thoughts about losing to his rookie wife in a fighting game. Minchiel is devastated. He begs for one more round, but Jia says no because she doesn't want to fight weaklings. Minchiel admits defeat. He says that if Jia would go to such lengths to win, there is something she really wants him to do. But Jia forgot what she was going to do. Suddenly, a small devil Jia appears and tells her that this is her chance to leave a deep impression on Minchiel. But the devil Jia is stopped by an angel Jia telling her they should engage in a particular spicy activity. Jia crushes the angel Jia in embarrassment. Suddenly, Minchiel calls out to Jia and suggests that they should go to sleep soon. But Jia knows that she won't get an opportunity like this again, so she tells Mincheol to come to the park entrance on Saturday at noon. He will be slapped once for every second he's late. While Jia is waiting at the park, the devil and angel Jia are calling her a coward because she could have gone all the way back there. But Jia is more concerned about how she barely got herself to tell Mincheol to come here. It is 5 minutes until noon and Mincheol still isn't here despite him leaving the house an hour ago. Jia thinks Mincheol went to the gym, but surely he wouldn't do that on a day like this. Then, Jia hears her name being called in the distance. She looks and is shocked at what she sees. It is Mincheol with no glasses and fashionable clothes. He looks incredibly hot. Jia compliments his outfit and comments how she's surprised Mincheol knows how to dress like that. Mincheol reciprocates by saying Jia looks pretty. Jia brushes it off, but her heart is racing. They leave for the renowned sushi restaurant where Mincheol has a reservation, and Jia questions if he's really Mincheol. But this doubt fades away as they have a light workout to help digest the sushi, which is really just bowling. Jia is having fun and didn't expect this because their hobbies don't overlap. Now that she thinks about it, Jia realizes that Mincheol and her have always had fun together since they were little, so maybe they aren't so different after all. After bowling, Mincheol's behavior changes again as he's being oddly considerate by going shopping, watching a movie, and he even risks losing his gains by drinking beer at a bar. But this isn't abnormal behavior because Mincheol has always tried his best when he can't do something, and this is the result of that. Seeing his efforts makes Jia happy and gives Mincheol 100 Jia points for the date, but it could have been higher. Mincheol claims he didn't do anything special. But when Jia suggests they drink beer like this every night, Mincheol knows he's been checkmated. Before they continue, Jia asks how far Mincheol intends to take their date tonight, which results in them sitting there in awkward silence for 5 minutes without using their phones. This makes Jia panic and Devil Jia thinks she should take it all the way and secure Mincheol. Angel Jia decides to agree with Devil Jia because today is the perfect opportunity and might not come again. This prompts Jia to break the silence by asking how far Mincheol is going to take it again. Mincheol says he's going to take it all the way. What a Chad. Mincheol grabs Jia's hand and repeatedly asks how far Jia planned to take it tonight. Their nice romantic moment is ruined by Siyu mistaking Mincheol for someone trying to pick up Jia. Nari had warned him not to do it, but he did anyway. She continues by asking if Jia and Mincheol are on a date, and Jia claims they're just on a walk, which is a blatant lie. Jia asks if Nari and Siyu are on a date, and they avoid the question. Soon, they all leave and Mincheol apologizes for being too pushy at the bar. But this is exactly what Jia wants and she loved it and she thought this was the perfect date. But there was a problem. Jia didn't like how Mincheol was trying to be someone he isn't for Jia because she likes him the way he is now. Taking this into account, Jia reduces her score for the date to 98 Jia points because Mincheol apologized earlier and prefers confidence. Mincheol takes this personally and surprises Jia by hugging her while she's walking away to make up for the lost points. But Jia avoids the question by claiming she's feeling hot, which is from her heart racing. Mincheol apologizes thinking she was referring to the temperature, but Jia doesn't like that because she just told him to stop apologizing. Suddenly, Jia pulls Mincheol in and kisses him. Jia did this as an example of what Mincheol should be doing because showing affection for each other is normal for couples. Her point is that it's okay for Mincheol to make mistakes and he doesn't have to apologize for something that isn't wrong. Hearing this prompts Mincheol to suddenly kiss Jia. Before they go home, Mincheol wants to go to the convenience store. While Jia is waiting outside, she thinks Mincheol is getting something starting with the letters CON. He could be getting Korean hangover medicine, but she thinks it's unlikely. Jia thinks the only reasonable conclusion is that Mincheol is preparing for a certain spicy activity. While Jia is waiting outside, someone recognizes her. Back when Jia was a sophomore in college, she met Gang Yu-jo. He is tall, everyone loves him and even covered Jia with his jacket, so he appeared to be friendly. They have been reunited at the convenience store 10 years after college. They exchange friendly greetings, but then Mincheol appears and apprehends Gang Yu because he thinks he's trying to pick up Jia. Jia diffuses the situation before Mincheol breaks his arm, and she introduces Mincheol as her husband. Before they leave, Gang Yu says they should meet up because her other friends from college are worried about her. Jia and Mincheol are now going home in a taxi, and Jia says that Gang Yu is just someone she knew in college. But he really isn't because something traumatic happened between them in college. Meanwhile, Gang Yu arrives home and tells someone named Jisoo who Jia knew in college that he ran into Jia today. She is shocked. 2 days later, Jia and Mincheol haven't made any progress in their relationship, and Jia blames it on Gang Yu. She tries to fix it by reassuring that nothing is going on between her and Gang Yu even though they had a crush on each other in college. Mincheol claims he's not worried because he knows it's hard for Jia to talk about, but she still thinks he's worried. Jia and Gang Yu's relationship wasn't special. But if she could erase anything from her life, she would erase her time at university where she met him. At university, they got closer because they were in the same major. They would share notes and go out to eat together, and as a result, Jia became interested in him. Soon, rumors started going around that they were dating. Jia and Gang Yu denied these claims because they weren't true. Around that time, Gang Yu started to jokingly ask Jia out, and she kept declining because she didn't want rumors to spread further. Despite this, Jia still hung out with him because he was fun to be around. Later at a party, a buff guy who looks like he's going to cause trouble asks if Gang Yu really isn't dating Jia. This guy is the class head Kang Juho. This is inconvenient because Jia became the class representative of the business major because she used her godly luck to get into this prestigious university, and her academic ability is terrible, meaning she can't do any other major. This means Jia has to get along with Kang because they collaborate. Unfortunately for Jia, Kang has a terrible reputation. It's easy to see why, because here, he asked Jia to be his wing woman on a blind date to make him look better, except there wasn't a blind date and he just wanted to ask her why she doesn't have a boyfriend. Jia avoids the question by saying she has high standards and is annoyed at Kang for setting this up. After, Jia consults with her longtime friend Yu Jisu about why people like Kang keep bothering her. Yu solves Jia's problem by suggesting she date him. Jia is outraged and doesn't want to date Kang. But what Yu meant is that Jia should date Gang Yu. They are already close, so it wouldn't look unnatural, so she should try it out. This is exactly what Jia does, as she asks Gang Yu out and he accepts. But their relationship is more so to maintain her peaceful life than anything, so it's not real, just like her and Mincheol's relationship was. With this, Jia's life is more peaceful than before, and she's growing to like Gang Yu more. So, Jia consults with Yenju about this, and she's annoyed that Jia is bragging about her relationship and didn't help her at all. Jia had the ideal life with decent grades, a boyfriend and good social circle, but this all came to an end when Jia entered this classroom. Everyone was looking at her as if she did something wrong, and Kang entered behind her. In the Silla period, there was a fable called the Ballad of Xiadong. The main character Xiadong came from humble origins and was infatuated by Princess Xianhua, who was the most sought-after woman in the Silla kingdom, and it was time for her to get married. In an attempt to seduce her, Xiadong got children to sing inappropriate songs about him and Xianhua together. This caused a scandal which ruined Xianhua's reputation, and they eventually got married. This is exactly what happened to Jia here. False rumors had spread that she and Kang had hooked up, and showing up to class together wearing the same clothes as yesterday didn't help the situation. While walking down the hall, Jia confronts Kang about it, but he claims he didn't know about the rumors and isn't worried. He tells Jia that it will go away because people will lose interest, but it only evolved into rumors about Jia dating both Kang and Gang Yu. Kang promised to fix the rumors, but he did nothing to stop it. Soon after, Jia was about to walk into a room when she witnessed Kang spreading those scandalous rumors about her. Jia was so shocked that she wasn't angry. To try and not make it worse, Jia tried to get along with everyone, studied hard and dedicated herself to student council work, but it didn't work. Her friends stopped hanging out with her and people she's never met started being friendly with her, probably to try and hook up with her because they think she's easy. Gang Yu was the only person who believed in her. But in the end it didn't matter because Jia broke up with him because she didn't want to cause him trouble. Jia didn't know how to fix it because she has to prove something never happened, which is impossible, because it's her word against an unstoppable and constantly evolving rumor. One day, Jia was walking in the rain with a cigarette when Kang pulled up and offered to take her out for drinks because he heard she broke up with Gang Yu. This was the breaking point for Jia. She picked up a brick, got on top of Kang's car and hurled it at Kang's windshield. Jia decided that if she wanted to put an end to the empty rumors, she'd have to make a real one. One where she is a madwoman. Jia wasn't proud of it and decided to drop out of college, which brings us to the present at the cafe, where she still isn't good at dealing with people. A prime example of this is this customer who ordered a cafe latte and got mad when she got a cafe latte instead of a vanilla latte. Instead of trying to make the customer admit their mistake by providing evidence from the CCTV, Jia decided that the best course of action was to keep her head down and make the vanilla latte. This is why Jia is conflicted about her situation with Mincheol. She doesn't know if saying nothing is better than telling Mincheol the truth about what happened with Gang Yu, because it might make it worse. The workday is over and it's raining. Neither Jia nor Nari brought their umbrellas because the weather forecast said it wasn't going to rain, so they borrowed umbrellas customers forgot in the cafe. But Jia doesn't need it because Mincheol is here with one. This prompts Nari to joke about Jia paying double her taxes, and Mincheol is concerned that Jia didn't pay her taxes this year. Jia and Mincheol walk home, and the lady next to them is posting about how stupid Mincheol and Jia are for sharing an umbrella when they have two. Suddenly, a car zooms by and splashes water on them. Mincheol blocks it with his umbrella and keeps Jia safe. But the lady next to them got soaked, which is the punishment she deserves for talking badly about Mincheol. Back at home, Mincheol creates a calming mood and uses various devices to make Jia relax and become sleepy. Jia doesn't understand what Mincheol is trying to do, but he doesn't either because he's following a YouTube tutorial. Mincheol is supposed to turn on classical music to create a calming mood, but instead turns on Indian music, which makes her less sleepy. Jia decides to pretend to sleep by fake snoring, and Mincheol can't believe it worked. Jia opens her eyes later to see Mincheol trying to hypnotize Jia with the coin, trying to make her obey his every order. Mincheol was supposed to do this before Jia went to sleep and desperately tries to find other methods. But he can't find any, so he commits to the method. But Mouse tries to play with the coin because it looks like a cat toy. After moving Mouse, Mincheol finds a new method and shines an extremely bright light into Jia's eyes as if she's being interrogated in a crime documentary. Jia can't handle the light, but before she opens them, Mincheol realizes the light is supposed to be dim and not pointed directly into her eyes. After giving Mouse a snack, Mincheol says that Jia will fall into a deep slumber, and on the count of 3, she will confront the past she has that she struggles to discuss with others. At this moment, Jia realizes that Mincheol actually did care about her past and set this whole thing up so they could talk about it without hurting their relationship. Mincheol counts to 3 and asks what Jia sees in front of her. Jia sees nothing because her eyes are closed, but thinks she should pretend to say something for Mincheol's sake. Before she gets the chance, Mincheol says she should see nothing because she has no uncomfortable secrets and did nothing wrong, and that he believes in her. This makes Jia remember a time in middle school where she was being punished when she hadn't done anything wrong, but was blamed for breaking a window, and she couldn't get out of it because she was seen as a troublemaker. This is when Mincheol stands up for her and professes that Jia didn't do it and that he will find the real culprit. This brought Jia to tears and she wakes up crying. Jia decides to get up and lay down next to Mincheol, who was sleeping. The focus briefly shifts to the bench in Mincheol's room ready to be used for some reason, and then back to Mincheol being confused why Jia is here. Jia doesn't know why either, so she cutely says that she had a scary dream. Mincheol is terrified because he thinks he caused it and goes back to sleep. Jia doesn't like that, so she makes Mincheol say quote unquote, "Oh no, our little baby had a bad dream." So Mincheol says exactly that, and Jia instantly regrets it because it's cringe. Mincheol offers his back to Jia to calm her down, and she accepts. Jia starts to make it seem like she's opening up about something, but then suddenly starts tickling Mincheol. Jia continues by asking if Mincheol wants to ask her anything else he's curious about because he was acting strange earlier. Mincheol thinks Jia is referring to the hypnosis and says that even if she's hiding something right now, she will eventually get close enough to him to tell her, because that is the type of person Jia is. Jia climbs onto Mincheol's back while asking him where he learned to say stuff like that. Jia tries to kiss Mincheol, but her hands slip down and she feels a long formation akin to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. They separate and are both embarrassed. An awkward silence fills the room, but it is broken when their hands eventually meet and they start kissing. They stop and Jia quickly moves Mincheol's hair aside, and after admiring her work, she immediately moves it back by patting his head. Jia notices that Mincheol's heart is beating fast and he admits that he's nervous. So nervous that his skin is hot. So hot that if you were to crack an egg on his face, it would instantly cook. Jia faces her back to Mincheol and questions why she's done all of this. Everything in their relationship, from their marriage to coming to his room today, was her idea. Jia just wishes that Mincheol would take initiative for once, but can't get herself to say it and starts to leave. When she reaches the door, Mincheol slams his hand next to her face and asks who allowed her to leave. In true kidnapper fashion, Mincheol picks Jia up, puts her on the bed, and starts nibbling on her shoulder. Jia wants Mincheol to stop, but since she started it, he refuses and comments how he's been holding back this whole time. Gia has also been holding back and thinks today might be the day it happens. Mincheol tries to take off his shirt but he's so jacked that he struggles to do so. So Mincheol rips off his shirt like a madman and says he won't hold back anymore. Gia tells him to continue, so Mincheol starts unbuttoning Gia's shirt. Mincheol starts to kiss Gia while pinning her to the bed and then moves to her neck. When Gia realizes her shirt is almost completely unbuttoned, she tries to cover up in embarrassment. Gia jokingly says that maybe Mincheol learned this from YouTube, but when Mincheol goes to grab a certain contraceptive from the desk, Gia realizes this is no time to joke around. Gia and Mincheol had remained children up until this moment, but today, they shared an adult exchange. However, when Gia wakes up saying she'll never do it again and thinks it was all a dream, but she knew it wasn't when she woke up next to Mincheol. But that doesn't matter because it's 8:30 a.m. and they're late for work. Gia tries to get out of bed, but is stopped because her back hurts. Instead of consoling Gia, Mincheol comments how the weather is nice and suggests she skip work and stay at home today. This prompts Gia to blankly stare at Mincheol as if she's lagging. Mincheol tries to get her to say something, but it doesn't work. So he tries to kiss her and Gia punches him and goes to get ready for work. But she can't because of her back pain. So Gia goes to the laundromat to wash the sheets and calls Yenju to call out sick. Yenju is skeptical, so she video calls Gia, and when Gia mentions her back pain, and she remembers that Gia is newly married, she puts two and two together and allows the sick leave. Gia tries to deny it even though that's exactly what happened. But this conversation gives her flashbacks from last night and she gets embarrassed. While Gia can't even go to work, Mincheol is completely fine. If you were to ask him why, he would say that he has that bedroom cardio because he trains more than you. Gia doesn't know how to handle the situation because she can barely look at Mincheol, so she hides in her room when Mincheol gets home. Gia references their agreement to prevent Mincheol from coming into her room. But Mincheol plays in a no reverse card by saying that the contract says that they need to talk it out, resulting in him opening the locked door and sending Gia flying. Gia thought he somehow broke down the door because it was locked, but he really just used his spare key. Mincheol drags Gia out while she complains how this isn't allowed, but Mincheol says that Gia has entered his room when she wanted many times before. This reminds Mincheol of a prank Gia played on him many years ago. In class, Gia wrote Gia's property on his arm. In hindsight, this is embarrassing. Gia and Mincheol sit down and eat snacks while Gia ponders how wonderful her marriage has been. She started working out and stopped smoking, but Mincheol dragged her out of her room an hour ago and hasn't said anything since. So, Gia asks Mincheol what he wanted to say to her. Mincheol reveals that he dragged Gia out of her room to ask her if she wants to see the new Spaghetti Man movie. Gia is confused but agrees, and Mincheol books the tickets for the weekend. Suddenly, Mincheol says that he likes Gia and that's the real reason she's here. Gia is flustered, but Mincheol continues by saying that he likes Gia. So, Gia tells Mincheol to prove it, and she instantly regrets what she said because she could barely handle the activities last night. To prove it, Mincheol asks Gia to close her eyes, and when she opens them, she sees a ring on her finger, and Mincheol asks Gia to marry him. Gia is confused because they're already married. But Mincheol meant they should become a real married couple rather than continue their contract marriage. Gia thinks this is too sudden, and the setting and mood isn't right for a proposal. So, Mincheol asks for the ring back so he can propose somewhere romantic like an expensive restaurant. But that's not what Gia meant, and she questions why Mincheol wants to marry her because her personality isn't the best and she runs away from her problems. But the truth is that Mincheol liked Gia since they were kids and regrets not being able to tell her, so he's doing it now. So once again, Mincheol asks Gia to marry him and Gia vows to be respectful and accepts. In response, Mincheol does a handstand instead of a bow to show his level of respect. Their marriage is final, but Gia is still embarrassed about last night. So, Gia suggests they do it again, and Mincheol immediately goes to take a shower to get ready. As Mincheol carries Gia away to the bedroom, Gia realizes that her real married life starts today. After Gia got carried into Mincheol's bedroom and disappeared for months, she finally makes her return, but this time, she's left the city and is on a trip abroad. She's having an amazing time feeling the fresh breeze of foreign air, but she's most glad she can share this moment with her Chad husband Mincheol and her parents, who are having a wonderful time fishing. Without her, how fun! But how did Gia get into this situation? It all started with Gia receiving a notification that her dad's 60th birthday is coming up, and when she mentions it to Mincheol, he thinks it's a big deal. But Gia thinks it isn't because her dad said to not worry about it because who celebrates their 60th birthday these days. But when discussing this with her sister, she asks if Gia is an idiot because who would actually believe their dad's words as is. So naturally, Gia says she would never think that, but we know the truth. Suddenly, Gia gets a call from Minchul's mom asking if she wants to go on a trip abroad. Gia is initially confused, but she explains that she just won it in a golfing competition. Looks like Minchul isn't the only Chad in the family. Shortly after, they all take a flight abroad and everyone is having the time of their life on the beach. Except Gia. This brings us back to the present where Gia's dad is fishing and is in ecstasy while reeling in a massive fish. Gia's parents are grateful to be so spoiled by Minchul and ask him to thank his parents for this trip, and he says he will relay the message. All is good until Minchul looks at Gia and notices she's sitting with her arms crossed and looks disinterested in the trip. So, Minchul asks why Gia's angry and she immediately asks Minchul what he's talking about as if he's crazy. Minchul explains that Gia is sprouting horns and that her expression looks off, but Gia once again avoids the question and asks Minchul to explain more. So, Minchul assumes Gia is just pissed off and she denies this because what she's feeling right now is too complicated to put into words. To list a few, she doesn't like being on a trip with her parents, doesn't like fishing, just got off a long flight, and is seasick. Seeing this, Minchul decides to think and uses his extensive Gia knowledge to change her mood, and he comes up with a solution. Minchul starts by asking Gia if she wants to see something cool. Gia's confused and Minchul starts by folding his hands and telling her to look closely because it is hard to see. Gia doesn't see anything and leans in closer to inspect Minchul's hands, but still can't figure it out. Suddenly, Minchul leans in and kisses Gia when she least expects it. Gia's so shocked that she yells at Minchul and hits the back of his neck in embarrassment, but Minchul has already taken measures to protect himself from Gia's wrath. Gia's parents also start to tease Gia for being in such a physically active relationship, if you know what I mean. Gia attempts to deny the allegations and she frantically asks Minchul why he would do something like that so suddenly. But Minchul is confused and asks if Gia didn't like it and attempts to cite his sources for why he did it. But he soon realizes that Gia did actually hate it and feels disappointed that his efforts only made the situation worse. Seeing Minchul disappointed, Gia doesn't know what to say and is deep in thought. She knows that Minchul is a wolf in disguise and phrased his question in a way that made it impossible to dodge. So, instead of answering, Gia places her hands on Minchul's shoulders and leans in such that they're face to face. Right as their lips are about to touch, the ship captain yells out that there's a big wave incoming and commands everyone to take cover for their safety. But safety is the least of Gia's concerns because the captain ruined the mood and surely a wave can't be that big, right? Gia and Minchul then turn around only to see a massive wave many times the height of the boat coming their way, and are speechless. Minchul tries to protect Gia, but the wave's immense strength sends them both into the ocean. Similar to the start of Gia's vacation, the sun is shining and Gia is still enjoying her freedom from the suffocating city life. Maybe a little bit too much freedom though because Gia has been stranded for weeks. Suddenly, Gia hears her name being called out and it's Minchul coming back from fishing in a very fashionable outfit. He's laughing and happy as if he's living the perfect life. Gia's glad to see Minchul return. But how did Gia and Minchul end up in this situation? After the wave sank the ship, Gia washed up on the shore of a remote island and only survived due to wearing a life vest. When Gia finally woke up, she didn't know where she was, but once she saw Minchul's glasses next to her and noticed he wasn't there, she expected the worst and screamed out Minchul's name to properly send him off into the afterlife. But Minchul was right behind her the entire time and is concerned with Gia's behavior. So, Minchul asks Gia what happened and she is shocked to see him. So, Gia tries to play it off as if nothing happened even though Minchul saw everything. Anyways, Minchul explains the situation to Gia. He also woke up on this island after the shipwreck and Gia is the only other person here within 500 meters. Gia thinks it's fine since they're okay, but then she comes to a horrifying realization. Her parents are not here. So, Gia desperately asks if Minchul has seen them and he doesn't respond, but his expression says everything Gia needs to know. Gia can't believe this is happening and falls to the ground at the thought of her parents being gone. Gia blames herself for this because if she convinced them to not go on the trip, this would have never happened. But Gia doesn't give up hope and thinks they're okay and desperately says they'll search all around the island together to find them. But Minchul knows Gia isn't in a good state of mind right now and calls out her full name to snap her out of it. But she's too focused on finding her parents and gets defensive, so Minchul forces something into Gia's mouth. Gia immediately has an intense reaction to what Minchul gave her and tries to get the taste out of her mouth because of how disgusting it is. Gia starts pouting and complaining to Minchul about what he gave her, and he says it's saponin. Gia doesn't know what that is, so Minchul explains that saponin is a bioactive compound present in many plants that is known for its bitter taste and sterilization properties. But Gia wanted to know what she ate, not the chemical in it. Instead of answering, Minchul grabs Gia's face and sees that she's no longer panicking and is relieved. Gia has returned to her default state and Minchul tells her to calm down. He says that while Gia is worried about her parents, her fears aren't reality because they landed on the island safely, so everyone else should also be safe. Gia thinks about it and agrees, but she's annoyed Minchul is treating her like a child and is able to smile in this situation. But she can't deny that it's working and wonders if having someone comfort her without words was always so therapeutic. After inspecting Gia's ear, Mindcall asks what happened to it, but Gia is confused. Minchul explains that something is different about it and Gia says it's because he's touching it, but Minchul is confident that her ear is colder than usual. Gia explains that it's probably because she was just in the water, but Minchul doesn't buy it and is sure he needs to warm her ears up. So, Minchul places his hands on Gia's ears and yells that Gia needs to get her temperature up fast because it's hot out right now, so if her temperature went down, then she's in danger. Gia doesn't understand, so Minchul yells that she could die if it's not fixed. Gia finally understands and doesn't want to die, so she stomps her feet and asks Minchul what she's supposed to do to stay alive. Minchul explains that they're both in bad shape due to being in the water for so long. So, the first step to warming up is to do something about their wet clothes because they're making them cold. Hearing this makes Gia realize what kind of situation they're in right now, and recalls the #1 tip to survive a disaster: maintain body temperature. To achieve this, you need to find a heat source, avoid wet clothes and keep as dry as possible. But most importantly, if there are any warm-blooded animals nearby, you must stay close to them to share each other's body temperature to overcome the cold. So, there is only one option left: sharing body heat with Minchul. Gia is prepared and actually excited for this. But Minchul has other plans. He has Gia lay down on a rock directly under the sun to absorb the maximum amount of heat. Gia feels like she's being grilled, which means Minchul's plan is working. Now that Gia's front side is warmed up, he has Gia flip over on her stomach like a fish being grilled, and she feels like she's in a bathhouse to exfoliate. While Gia's laying there relaxing, she's relieved Minchul is here with her and hard at work grinding a green substance because she would be scared and crying without him by her side. So, Gia thanks Minchul, but he doesn't know what Gia's thanking him for. Gia explains that she's just thankful for his help, which makes Minchul think these are Gia's last words before dying and asks if she's feeling sick. This annoys Gia because Minchul can't even accept a compliment. But Minchul says that it's too early to feel safe. He then gets up ready to use the freshly ground green substance on Gia and determined to use it at all costs, and she is terrified. Moving on, fire is a heavenly gift for humanity and is as dangerous as it is useful. Getting burned is one of the most painful things a human can experience, so fire is not to be underestimated. Given this information, what do you think the largest cause of burns is? Maybe burns caused by direct contact with fire? Or burns caused by secondary sources such as boiling water or chemicals? But these are both incorrect. The biggest cause of burns is from the sun, which brings us back to what Minchul is trying to do. He wants Gia to apply the green substance on her skin to keep it safe and prevent burns. Even after the explanation, Gia is still suspicious of the mysterious green sticky substance and doesn't want to use it. So, Minchul explains that it's made of seaweed, which is commonly put in skincare products. But Gia turns around and covers her ears so she can't hear Minchul's seaweed propaganda anymore. But Minchul will not stop until Gia puts the sticky green substance on her face, so he tells her that direct sunlight causes skin to age. Gia's life flashes before her eyes, and she immediately puts it on. Now that they can maintain perfect skin, Gia and Minchul start to discuss how to survive, and Minchul suggests they start by making a fire. Gia's confused because she thinks water is the natural first step, but Minchul explains that water can actually be quite deadly. Even if it looks clean, it can still be dangerous from the presence of bacteria, so they need to boil it beforehand to ensure they don't get sick. Normally, getting water would be the first step, but since they still have some energy left, they should make a fire first. But Jia doesn't know how to make a fire and thinks they're going to make one by rubbing sticks together. But Minchil has other plans using a water bottle that he found washed up on the beach. His plan is to fill the bottle with water and place it under direct sunlight. If done correctly, the sunlight will be concentrated into one spot, which will get very hot. Next, Minchil needs to hold the bottle steady in one spot while Jia finishes the job with the stick, and she tells Minchil that he will be in great danger if he burns her hand with the sunlight. So, Minchil holds the bottle with maximum focus while Jia vigorously spins the stick on top of the wood, and soon, Jia's expression scares the wood into catching fire. This is an average day for a Chad like Minchil, but it isn't for Jia, and she is extremely happy it worked and puts her hand out to give Minchil a high five. After much consideration, Minchil gives Jia a high five and they can now enjoy the fire they worked so hard to make. The only issue now is that Jia is hot and the fire only makes the heat worse. She tries to increase ventilation within her dress by pulling it, but it doesn't work, and Minchil immediately looks away when he sees her doing it. Jia is confused by Minchil's actions and asks why he's suddenly sitting so far away from her. So naturally, Minchil immediately changes the topic and points at a seagull in the sky. He wonders if it has protein so he can maintain his gains, and Jia confirms this because it is a friend of the chicken species. So, Minchil asks Jia if she ever had bird meat other than chicken and tries to make eye contact. But the sight is too much for Minchil to handle, so he tries to hide his face. Jia asks what Minchil is doing, and he says it's because of an insect, and Jia starts freaking out. She quickly stands up and tries to make it go away because she hates bugs. But there was never a bug, and the sight Minchil sees is breathtaking, but he somehow manages to control himself and doesn't even blush. So, Minchil takes a good look at Jia and finally comes up with a solution. Minchil mentions that it's hot and asks if Jia is thirsty, and immediately starts sprinting away to find water before she can answer. But Jia stops him because she thinks they should go together. But Minchil says that someone needs to make sure the fire stays alive and delegates this role to Jia and says to scream if anything happens. Jia agrees without any suspicion and thinks Minchil just has a lot of energy. Jia, on the other hand, is exhausted after making the fire and thinks it's because she always skips her workouts and wonders if that was a mistake. Meanwhile, in the forest, Minchil is resting his face on a tree and tries to calm down. Every time he looks at Jia, she looks so beautiful no matter the situation, and Minchil can't handle it. No matter what he tries, he can't get her out of his head and has images of Jia at questionable angles engraved into his mind. Minchil doesn't know what to do, so he repeatedly slams his head into the tree to get his act together. He can't be like this around Jia anymore. Finally, Minchil puts on his glasses and decides to lock in. He knows this feeling is temporary and is only caused by an increase in blood flow to a specific portion of his lower body, causing it to become enlarged due to experiencing a life or death situation. Suddenly, Minchil hears Jia scream and starts sprinting in her direction at maximum speed to save her. This is a venomous snake, and Jia is currently face to face with one and has been backed into a tree. From a documentary she watched, Jia knows snakes only attack if bothered first, so she should be okay. But Jia can't stand in shock forever, and she decides to use the fire to protect herself. So, Jia starts sprinting away from the tree, and right as she gets to the fire, the snake jumps towards her and she thinks it's over, and it successfully bites a shirt. Suddenly, Minchil appears at the last moment wearing a cloth around his arm, which the snake bit instead of Jia. With Jia still in shock, Minchil removes the snake, pulls his arm back, and throws the snake into the sun with all his strength. Jia can't believe what just happened and is grateful for Minchil saving her. Suddenly, Minchil grabs Jia and frantically asks if she's hurt and if the snake bit her. Jia says she's fine, but Minchil continues and says he needs to perform first aid on her. Minchil starts panicking because there's no hospital and isn't hearing Jia's words, and she's terrified by this. So, Jia slaps him. Well, she actually does this cute-handed slap instead. Jia tells Minchil that she's fine and thanks him for saving her and asks if he's calmed down now. If it weren't for him, Jia's life would have been shortened by 10 years. Jia immediately shifts her focus to the next item on her to-do list, but she gets embarrassed and asks why Minchil isn't wearing anything. Minchil explains that he's like this because it's an emergency, and it's best practice to wrap exposed skin with clothing to protect yourself from wild animals. But Jia is just irritated that Mincheol prepared himself for this situation, but didn't include her. Mincheol tries to play it off, but Jia smirks and hugs him and says she was just kidding, which catches him off guard. Jia is just grateful that she's alive. However, Mincheol doesn't look happy and is uncomfortable, and Jia realizes that maybe something is off with him right now. Later, Mincheol approaches Jia in his new classy outfit and says he found something amazing and tells her to come check it out. Mincheol found a stream and Jia is so happy. She immediately jumps in and can finally cool off from the scorching heat. Jia tries to drink it because it isn't still water, but Mincheol stops her and pulls out a pot to boil it in to make sure it's safe. Soon, night arrives and Jia can't believe what Mincheol has achieved in just a day. He set up a tent, styrofoam floors, chairs, has clean water, and it all looks very modern. Jia was expecting to live out her primitive survival dreams and build huts out of mud. But Mincheol interjects and explains survival tip number 2. Use everything you have. Mincheol was initially planning to make shelter out of tree branches, but he noticed trash washed up on the beach and found some useful items. For instance, this cup of water he's handing to Jia. It might be trash, but he thoroughly cleaned it and it's as good as new now. But Jia doesn't have to use it if she's uncomfortable. Seeing Mincheol's effort and consideration makes Jia happy, and she drinks all of the water in the cup. Jia says they don't have the luxury of being picky and is grateful for having a cup to drink out of. She acknowledges how Mincheol must be exhausted from all the work he's done and feels bad for throwing a tantrum earlier. After all, Mincheol already comforted her on the boat and saved her from the snake while Jia hasn't done much for him. When Jia got here, she was so scared, but it's been easier because Mincheol was always by her side and she's thankful for all his help today. Mincheol blushes and acts like it was no big deal, but Jia knows he's just shy. So, Jia rests her head on Mincheol's shoulder and says they'll make it home alive. And thus, their first night on the island is over. No, wait. Jia is wide awake and Mincheol is over her. Maybe this is just the beginning. Mincheol leans in for a kiss and, Psyche thought it was going to happen again. Jia is actually having a flashback of that intense night in their bedroom and reflects on their relationship. They got married and then decided to have their first date. But this begs the question, what now? They jumped over the hurdles of getting married and living together easily. But it feels like they tripped on the rock of dating and fell to the ground. It's not like their relationship got any worse, it's just different. For instance, Jia and Mincheol's hands touched at the gym, and he immediately apologizes. Jia wonders if married couples apologize over something silly like this, and Mincheol sheepishly says, no, this is the type of awkwardness that has developed when they started dating. In other words, their relationship is in a metaphorical traffic jam, which brings us back to the present. Is Mincheol trying to relieve the traffic jam by making a move? They already mostly solved their survival situation, so is Mincheol now trying to shoot his shot with his wife? Jia is so excited and thinks they're going to be like animals in the wild and likes this side of Mincheol. But Jia doesn't think it's a good idea and considers pushing him away. But Mincheol makes the first move by leaning in and whispering in Jia's ear to be quiet. Jia's loving this and Mincheol proceeds to grab her waist and she's freaking out because she thinks it's really about to happen. Jia tries to stop him, but Mincheol puts his finger over her mouth and says it won't take long. This makes something snap in Jia and it feels like her heart is about to explode as Mincheol's pressed up against her. Jia doesn't know if she should stop resisting and just give her body to Mincheol. So Jia makes her decision and tells Mincheol that she's okay and prepared for everything he's about to do to her. Mincheol's glad Jia finally accepts the situation and she is so ready to not be able to walk tomorrow morning. So Mincheol begins by saying that on the count of 3, they'll rush outside at the same time and fight the bears that are approaching their tent, and Jia instantly accepts her fate. But then Jia realizes what Mincheol actually said, and when Mincheol says 3, they go outside and make loud noises by yelling and banging random items together. The bears take one look at Mincheol and immediately run away as fast as they can. Mincheol's exhausted and asks if Jia's okay. But she's just standing there in disappointment and doesn't know what she was expecting because this is Mincheol after all. The next day, Mincheol's living his best life, but Jia's exhausted and not in the mood for his nonsense. Today their goal is to find food. Mincheol reiterates that food is essential for their survival, but Jia's annoyed because she couldn't sleep at all due to what he did last night and his energy right now is getting on her nerves. As they walk, Mincheol warns Jia to be careful because her skin might get irritated if it touches the grass. But Jia doesn't feel worried and finally realizes why. Minchul's confused about what Jia realized, but she says to not worry about it and to keep going. Jia believes the reason Minchul is so energetic is the suspension bridge effect. In short, Minchul was trying to use the situation to gain a lot of attraction points with Jia to ease the awkwardness that has developed in their relationship. This would explain Minchul being so energetic and his overdramatic actions. Jia thinks she fully understands the situation and has discovered Minchul's scheming side. But she thinks he doesn't need to do all that because Minchul's already super cool. Jia's impressed by Minchul and can't believe the suspension bridge effect feels this good. But she doesn't want Minchul to overdo it just to get some points, so she asks him if maybe he's overdoing it a bit. Minchul asks if it was too obvious, and Jia says that of course she noticed because they've known each other for so long. Minchul surprised Jia so right through him, but then he apologizes for what he's about to do and starts to fall while Jia is staring in awe. Minchul's lying on the ground and Jia's shocked. It's a beautiful day on the island. But Minchul's sick and Jia can't believe this happened. Minchul was constantly telling her to not get sick or hurt, but here he is sick. Suddenly, Minchul's primal instincts kick in and he tries to get up, and Jia tries to stop him because he has a fever. But Minchul says that he's better now, but Jia doesn't believe it. But Minchul knows he must work because he needs to keep the fire alive and find food because he promised Jia to get them out of here alive. Jia is frustrated with Minchul, so she ties him up and tells him to shut up and get some rest. I bet you wish that you were being tied up instead. Minchul demands to be untied, but Jia doesn't want to, so she's not going to. If Minchul wants to be untied, he can do it himself because he loves to show off his strength, so it should be light work. But Minchul says he's not strong enough for that. Jia reiterates that Minchul's job now is a rest, and she will go find food. Minchul begs her to not go and to not worry about him. But Jia loses it and asks why she can't worry about him. Minchul is shocked by this and Jia explains that Minchul's been working without rest ever since they got here and has overworked himself. All of this makes Jia wonder if Minchul thinks she's untrustworthy. So Minchul apologizes, but Jia has had enough and tells Minchul to stop apologizing. They're a married couple after all, so Minchul should trust his wife and get some rest. Minchul finally accepts his fate and thanks Jia. Soon after, Jia thinks she lost her mind because of how she handled the situation with Minchul. Telling Minchul to trust her because they're a married couple is a line straight out of a K-drama and is so embarrassing. Jia is rolling on the ground panicking because she doesn't know how she's going to face Minchul now. But suddenly, she stops and thinks, all of this is a waste of time and not helping Minchul get better. Jia needs to find food. Back home, Jia could press a button on her phone and get perfectly prepared food sent straight to her doorstep. If she's full but hasn't finished everything, Jia can throw the excess away without a second thought because they lived in an abundant environment with seemingly endless amounts of food. But Jia's hungry right now and has been searching for food for 3 hours without any luck. Her vision is starting to get blurry and she's lost her sense of direction in time. But she must go on to survive. Jia just needs to find something edible. Suddenly, Jia spots wild mushrooms, but she thinks they look poisonous and is forced to move on. So far, Jia has only collected a few pieces of fruit and has been forced to finally search the beach. Here, trash regularly gets washed up and it's stinky because of all the rotting fruit and flies are everywhere, so Jia wanted to avoid it. But it is also the place most likely to find something edible. Jia begins by flipping over debris and while searching the water, she spots crabs. Jia is face to face with her potential dinner and begs them not to run away. As to not scare them, Jia slowly approaches and is within arm's reach of a crab. But suddenly, a wave similar to that sank their ship appears behind her and she thinks it's over for real this time. Jia begins to reflect on her life and wonders why nothing ever goes her way. From moving schools in middle school to taking an extended leave from university to giving up writing the novels she loved so much, it's always the same and never works. Even if it's for Minchul's benefit only, Jia just needs help right now to survive. Just as Jia said this, something hit her on the head and she thinks God is punishing her. But Jia finally realizes that her prayer reached God and sees a tub of chocolate protein powder in pristine condition floating in front of her to save them from starvation and, more importantly, prevent Minchul from losing his gains. Soon, night has fallen and Minchul finally wakes up and looks around confused. Jia greets him, commenting how he finally woke up and how it's perfect timing because what she's preparing is almost ready. Minchul's confused because he's been sleeping. So, Jia excitedly reveals that she made protein porridge and is eager to start eating. Jia begins drinking her nutrient-dense meal and asks if Minchul really isn't going to eat it to get better. Jia reminds Minchul of how much effort it took for her to make this and attempts to force it down his throat, but he resists. Jia continues to remind him that she is spoon-feeding him the same protein he loves back home and questions why he won't eat it. Minchul attempts to say that all the essential amino acids broke down from the boiling, but Jia says that's nonsense and insists he eats it to get better. But Minchul still resists and then grabs Jia's bandaged hand while she's not looking and asks her what happened. She quickly gets her hand out of his grasp. She then explains what happened and Minchul repeats her by saying she got caught up by a wave and got hurt while looking for food for him. But Jia corrects him by saying the food wasn't just for him while blushing. Minchul's in disbelief and Jia nervously avoids eye contact, but she breaks and starts yelling about how she went through all that trouble to get the food specifically for him and asks if he has a problem with that. Jia continues by saying how a simple thank you would be appreciated, but quickly tells Minchul to not say thank you because she'll get embarrassed. Jia then notices Minchul's expression and sees him crying, so Jia gets embarrassed and says she's not hurt and to not worry. But then Minchul apologizes. Jia has never seen Minchul so vulnerable before, and he just continues to apologize while hiding his face with his hand. Ever since Jia was born, her parents always seemed mature and thought she would become mature like them when she grows up. But when Jia reached the age when her parents had her, her level of maturity wasn't close to her parents back then. When Jia mentioned this to her dad, he said he never thought of himself as mature, but he acted mature in front of Jia and eventually, he got accustomed to acting mature. But all of this is just an act and part of being an adult. As Jia's looking at Minchul crying, she realizes something. She's been relying on Minchul, someone who sometimes seems like a clown and other times very mature. But Minchul is no different than everyone else and is just pretending to be mature. So Jia finds a solution. She sternly tells Minchul to stop and asks why he's sitting there crying at his age and asks if crying will solve any of their problems. At this moment, Jia evolved into Minchul's mother who disciplined them with the overwhelming force of a baguette. Minchul bursts into uncontrollable laughter, and Jia is glad he's playing along with her teacher-student roleplay. She continues and makes a sarcastic remark about how Minchul didn't filter what he said in front of his teacher, which makes him laugh more. Minchul mentions how Jia is incredible and how it's almost like his mom is really there with them. Jia is also surprised and tries to think of what similarities she and Minchul's mother have. But she decides to move on for her sanity and asks if Minchul's feeling better now. Minchul explains that he's not just feeling better, it feels like they're here on vacation instead of being stranded. He also thought he was dreaming when he saw the protein powder, and Jia did as well. Suddenly, Minchul apologizes because Jia is going through all this trouble because of him. This leaves Jia speechless, but she sighs and tells Minchul to listen up. She explains how Minchul has gotten into the habit of apologizing because it feels right even though he did nothing wrong. This is a bad habit and a form of escapism. There might be situations where doing this is appropriate, but when he's with Jia, he should never apologize without a proper reason and then brutally flicks Minchul's forehead to reinforce her point. But Minchul's still confused because he doesn't know what else to do in a situation like this because Jia got hurt trying to help him. But Jia doesn't know either and tells him to figure it out because he's not a kid. So Minchul smiles and praises Jia for doing such a good job gathering food and saving him, and she appreciates it. While she's caught off guard, Minchul says he loves her. This makes Jia blush and Minchul comes in from behind and hugs her. Minchul continues to say he likes her while not letting her escape, and she asks if he's doing this because he feels sick. Minchul confirms that he's sick and currently being taken care of by Jia. But Jia is still confused and attempts to escape Minchul's embrace. Suddenly, Jia lets out a scream of pleasure from Minchul making a move, and they begin to engage in spicy activities involving the Leaning Tower of Pisa mentioned in the previous part. It's now morning and Minchul's already hard at work. Jia is currently in disbelief because Minchul made DIY dumbbells and doing bicep curls even though he's still recovering. He explains that he's been having the urge to work out, so he made training equipment because he can't afford to lose any muscle mass. Jia is speechless and Minchul continues his workout. But she's frustrated and asks why Minchul's working out because they're both suffering from hunger and heat and are tired. but he explains that a healthy mind produces a healthy body, so they should be working out more in the situation. Minchil then asks if Jia would like to join him while flexing, but Jia's declines. Minchil's now doing pull-ups while Jia's thinking about their situation. A lot of things have happened since they got here, and it's been hectic with some close calls. But Jia feels like everything will work out somehow. So she calls Minchil and wraps her arms around him. Minchil's confused, but Jia snuggles up against his chest and tells him to not move. Minchil asks if this is punishment for last night, but Jia avoids the question and leans in to kiss him. But, right as it's about to happen, Jia's parents appear beside them in disbelief. Jia takes some time to process what just happened and then hides behind Minchil in embarrassment because her parents saw them doing that. So Jia's parents suggest they take a stroll and come back later so Jia and Minchil can finish their activities. Jia is still flustered while Minchil shields her from the crowd, but she shouts for them to take her back with them. In a hotel, Jia is curled up in a ball on a bed and her parents are confused why she's still in shock. Jia isn't shocked because the remote island they thought they were stranded on was a mere 4-hour walk from a tourist attraction. They were only found because a boat passing by reported the smoke from their fire. But she should have realized it sooner because no real deserted island would have so much everyday waste wash up on shore, and she feels stupid for not realizing it sooner. Nonetheless, Jia's mom is still confused why Jia isn't back to normal because she's safe, which is what really matters. So Jia's mom decides to stop wasting time and get ready to make up for the sightseeing they missed. But Jia's frustrated because her mom doesn't seem worried about her at all while she was so worried for her mom's safety earlier. Jia's dad sees how she's fuming from what her mom just did. So he explains how her mom was actually very worried about her. She couldn't sleep and demanded to be allowed to search for Jia. They tried to stop her, but she wouldn't stop trying because she knew Jia was alive. Regardless, Jia's dad insists that she enjoy the rest of her vacation with Minchil because they're leaving tomorrow. Jia's frustration is now eased and she agrees to stop moping around. Jia is now with Minchil and doesn't want to go sightseeing because they've already done so much traveling and is sick and tired of it. She just wants to chill in the room and asks Minchil if he agrees, if you know what I mean. But Minchil does not and is ready for a full day of sightseeing. Jia reiterates that they were just stranded so they need to relax a bit. And yet, Jia and Minchil are now under the scorching sun on a lighthouse. Now, they're in a crowded area eating ice cream and looking at dolphins in the sea. Jia's convinced this won't be relaxing, but her expression says otherwise. Jia is now being carried by Minchil because she tripped while running in excitement and says this reminds her of the old days, referring to their childhood. But Minchil mentions how this happened during their honeymoon. This makes Jia remember how one day she suddenly got married to Minchil and so many heart-fluttering moments followed. So Jia tells Minchil that she wants to do something when they get back home. Back in Korea, Jia and Minchil's story is all over social media. However, the iced hot Americano lady demands for Yenduek to bring the girl in the photo to her with a very menacing face, which is some very subtle foreshadowing if you ask me. This all happened because before they went back to Korea, Jia was approached for an interview because their quote-unquote survival was big news. Jia isn't the type to refuse these types of things, but Minchil had other plans. He used his hand to block the sun in Jia's eyes and Jia was happy about this. So, she nudged Minchil with her elbow, and this ended up going viral online. Back at the cafe, Nari asks Jia if she enjoyed it, but Jia doesn't know what she's talking about. Nari explains that being deserted on an island makes some specific images come to mind, struggling to survive with countless conflicts, but these eventually bring them together, resulting in all-night spicy activities. Jia initially doesn't understand, but then she realizes and is disgusted. But she also gets embarrassed and asks what Nara is talking about. Nari explains that this is only natural for a married couple left alone on a deserted island. Why else would people in rural areas have a lot of children? Interested in these intimate interactions, Nari asks for Jia's stories, but she sighs and explains that being in a shipwreck is no joke because they were hungry and hot. Nari begs to hear more, but Jia can't think of anything. Suddenly, images of Minchil on top of her and various other spicy activities enter her mind, which makes her face glow red in embarrassment. Nari notices this and comments how Jia must have really enjoyed herself. She's also jealous because she's been working twice as hard covering for the manager who was having a lovey-dovey vacation with her husband. But Jia denies that it was lovey-dovey. Suddenly, Yenju walks in and asks Jia if it was really that good, and they are shocked Yenju's here. She immediately asks Nari for the inventory list she was asked to do, and Nari says she only has one item left to count. Yenju then asks if Jia has time to talk later and she says yes. At an apartment building, Jia's nervously standing in the elevator making sure to be perfectly on time. Jia thinks she's being called here because she has 10 plus missed calls from Yenju, but there was nothing Jia could do because she was busy surviving. She remembers that Yenju was super strict in college, so she's worried about what's about to happen. The elevator opens and Jia notices Yenju's door open with boxes outside. So she nonchalantly enters and apologizes for the missed calls only to see Yenju wearing clown glasses and setting up decorations, and Jia realizes she made a fatal mistake. Yenju takes off her party outfit and sighs because Jia came an hour early even though she was told to not come early. Jia apologizes but is relieved because she thought Yenju was mad, but she is mad. She spent all morning setting up the decorations and Jia is touched by this. But Yenju says that she's not petty even though Jia ruined the surprise. But Jia says to forget it and tells Yenju to open wide while moving a skewered hot dog to her mouth. Yenju chews it and then looks at Jia and hugs her out of nowhere. She cries onto Jia's shoulder and says she was so worried because she disappeared without saying a word and asks if she's hurt. Jia says she's fine and tells her to calm down. So, Yenju immediately stops hugging and Jia's mad about how fast she pulled away. Then Yenju mentions how she saw Jia's interview and thought it was funny, which makes Jia blush. Yenju asks if she's been contacted by anyone, but Jia is confused while munching. She explains that people get famous from situations like this and eventually become influencers. Jia tells her to get real because she's only trending on YouTube, so it's not a big deal, and Yeonja's skeptical. After all, Jia cleaned up her social media from her author days, so only a handful of people can contact her. After hearing this, Yenju looks at an email she received from Yomi Entertainment about Jia, smiles and then deletes it. The same day at Mitchell's work, he reads an email from Yomi Entertainment asking about Jia and doesn't know what to make of it. So he takes a coffee break while reading news about them being stranded. Suddenly, Mincheol is confronted by various women in his office who ask if he knows if he's famous. They think Mincheol is so cool for blocking the sun for his wife, and he nervously says thank you. But one of the women makes a move and asks if Mincheol would block the sun for her just once. Jia can't believe this happened to him, and Mincheol is having a headache just thinking about it. He isn't close with the co-worker, and yet she had the audacity to say something like that. So Jia nervously asks if he did it for her, and Mincheol says he didn't because he felt something was off. Jia is so happy to hear this, but her expression changes when he says it wasn't just the one girl. Everyone in the office wanted Mincheol to block the sun for them. So Jia thinks and asks why Mincheol doesn't go ahead and block the sun for them. Unfortunately, Mincheol falls for the bait and asks if he can because he thought it would make Jia jealous. But Jia confirms and confidently says that she's not that petty. But Jia is actually that petty and can't go to sleep. But this doesn't seem to bother Mincheol as he's fast asleep, and Jia's annoyed by this. So, she decides he deserves to be punished and wraps his arm under her head such that his arm will be extra stiff tomorrow. After all, this is what Mincheol deserves. Jia suddenly gets distracted by Mincheol's ring and is sweating, implying something impossible to decipher by a maidenless male scriptwriter such as myself. Soon, Jia is fast asleep on Mincheol's chest and he lifts his eye mask and looks at her. He blushes, places his hand on Jia's cheek and then repositions his eye mask because he won't be able to sleep tonight with Jia like this. In the morning, Mincheol's trying to unstiffen his arm and Jia smirks at his feeble efforts. She asks Mincheol what's wrong with his arm and Mincheol explains that it's strangely stiff, meaning that her prank worked, but she still feels guilty. But Mincheol thinks it's actually because yesterday was arm day. So Jia tells him to take off his shirt so she can put a cooling patch on him, and while Mincheol declines, he ultimately ends up shirtless with the cool patch on his shoulder. This makes his shoulder feel better, and he comments that maybe it's because Jia put it on him. This catches Jia off guard and makes her embarrassed, so she resorts to violence and complains about how Mincheol is saying stuff like that so early in the morning. Mincheol's now at work and facing off with the copy machine. Mincheol came out victorious and copied a paper cutout of his hand. He hands these cutouts to his coworkers, which can be used to block the sun, and they're dumbfounded. Mincheol explains that he's doing that because he's a married man and cannot block the sun for just anyone else. He then smiles at them, which is simply too much for his coworkers to handle, and they flee the scene. Mincheol's confused about what just happened and thinks handling the situation is hard. He thinks Jia would approve of his solution, but he doesn't know what she would say about the email he received yesterday because he forgot to tell her about it. The scene shifts to the cafe and Yenduek nonchalantly greets Jia. But Jia calmly explains that they aren't open yet and asks him to leave without saying his name. Yenduek comments how she couldn't even say his name and wonders what he should order since he's here. But Jia says they're not open. So naturally, Yenduek ignores this and orders a hot iced Americano. Jia is fuming right now, but holds her composure and asks if this is a trending drink, and Yenduek explains that it's the cafe's signature drink. Jia somehow remains calm and tells the customer to wait while she makes their order. Jia begins to make the order, but Nari is sweating after seeing what Jia is actually doing. She poured a red liquid into the drink and presented the hot iced Americano version to Yenduek. Yenduek suspicious because the drink doesn't look hot, but Jia urges him to try it before judging. Yenduek then makes a motion that looks like he's smoking and Nari tells him smoking is not allowed in the cafe. But he's using an inhaler and asks if the cafe bans medical devices. Nari profusely apologizes and Jia tells him to stop messing with Nari and say what he wants from her. But Yenduek claims he's not here for business and then says he's really here for the video of Jia that went viral. So Jia comments how he's actually here for business and demands to know what he wants. But he wants nothing and suggests that Jia claim the benefits of this situation while she can. Jia's confused, but Yenduek explains that the interview has gained a lot of traction, so surely Jia has made some money from it. But she hasn't and regrets doing the interview because it's only made her life more tiring. So Yenduek does some quick calculations for how much money Jia could have made and shows her the astronomically large number. Jia can't believe this is real. But Yenduek reveals that this information is restricted because the interview is associated with his company. If only she were affiliated with his company, she could get a cut of the profits. Jia thinks Yenduek is only here to rub the number in her face, but he isn't and says that Jia is still under his company's management. Jia's confused, but he explains that it's the same contract she signed when she was a writer with his management company, and Article 17 Paragraph 3 states that the contract is automatically renewed every year if it's not manually terminated. Since Jia never did this and just disappeared without a trace, their contract is still technically valid. So Yenduek asks if Jia wants to get involved again, and she's hesitant. The scene shifts to the iced hot Americano lady sitting outside the cafe and thanks Yenduek for his work. He confirms that his scheme worked and hands the iced hot Americano version to her. She reveals that they are getting involved with Jia because her going viral is an opportunity to massively profit, which would be foolish to miss out on. She then takes a sip of the drink and immediately starts sweating and yells at Yenduek for ordering something so spicy. The secret ingredient in the iced hot Americano version is capsaicin, which is extremely spicy. While the lady is screaming at Yenduek, he sends an email to ensure Jia is forced to work with them. It's now night and Jia arrives home tired, but Minchul's already home and tells Jia they need to talk with a concerned expression. Jia and Minchul are seated across from each other, and Minchul has a blank expression. Typically, it's hard to tell what he's thinking unless he's exercising, but Jia knows something's different today. Minchul is pissed off, so Jia asks if something is bothering him, and he brings up a clause of their relationship contract, which says that communication is a priority. If this is an issue, Minchul has come up with a solution. A lie detector used in games. They used it once a long time ago, but Jia is apprehensive. She doubts if this is really necessary and asks if Minchul doesn't trust her. But Minchul says he has this because he doesn't trust himself, and if Jia doesn't want to, he can be the only one wearing it. Jia doesn't know how to respond because Minchul left her no room to object. So naturally, Jia gets up and asks Minchul if he thinks she's scared of a lowly lie detector and declares that the second truth game will begin. Since this was Minchul's idea, he's going first. Jia's first question is if Minchul's currently angry. Minchul says he is not and they sit in silence as nothing happens. Jia can't believe her assumption was wrong because Minchul's face definitely looked angry. But he starts sweating and yells because the lie detector hurts so much. Minchul finally admits that he's angry and warns Jia that the lie detector's strength seems to be amplified for some reason. Jia is nervous, but places her finger on the device. Minchul's question is if there is anything Jia is hiding from him. Her mind is immediately sent into darkness, and she thinks of all the times she snuck spicy stir-fry squid in the middle of the night, lied about exercising, had a junk food feast, and binging right after exercising. Just thinking this makes the device sting Jia, and she says the device is broken because she never answered the question. But Minchul still wants to answer the question, but Jia avoids it and demands to know why Mincheol is angry right now. So, Mincheol asks if there is a connection between her and Yomi Entertainment, and Jia is shocked Mincheol knows about them. So, Mincheol explains the email asking questions about her. But when Yomi Entertainment sent an email saying a contract with Jia had been established, Mincheol felt left out because the decision also concerns him. Jia is confused because she never received an email from them and assumes this is why Yenduek showed up at the cafe. She had a bad feeling about it but can't figure out why he contacted Mincheol without her knowing. Jia can't figure it out, so she decides to explain everything to Mincheol about her time as a writer. When Jia was in college, she would lay on the bed and read books while Yenju was writing. One day, the phone rings and Yenju assumes it's for her, but it's not and it's for Jia. A publishing company was calling and Jia is surprised they're interested in her and not Yenju. Jia meets with the publisher who is Yenduek, and he calls her a writing genius and refers to her as Fire Chicken Author because he doesn't know her name. But Jia says to call her by her name and that she's not a genius and that he's being too nice. But Yenduek says it's the truth and then explains his honest opinion. The novel is terrible. No grammar rules are followed and it's something you'd find on an internet forum. Jia is on the verge of tears, but Yenduek says none of that matters because it's fun to read. Furthermore, it's her first novel and it somehow managed to win first place in a competition. Jia admits that she was a bit lucky, but Yenduek says that's also a skill. He asks who Jia's favorite author is and she says she reads whatever because she's not picky. Suddenly Jia comes up with a genius idea and shows him something on her phone. After reading, Jia asks if it's not good because this person's writing stands out to her the most. Yenduek smiles and says it's pretty good. The writing style is elegant and professional and he asks Jia to introduce him to whoever wrote this. The scene shifts to Jia returning to Yenju's room with items Yenduek bought for her. Yenju asks how the meeting went and she explains how he kept calling her a genius. But most importantly, she showed him Yenju's writing and she's concerned why. Jia explains it's because she's her favorite author and Yenju is strangely mad. But she sheepishly asks what the publisher thought of her novel. Jia explains that he said it was well written, but she doesn't know if he's trustworthy because he wanted to make a bet with Jia. The bet is that if 100,000 or more copies of her novel are sold within half a year, Jia has to sign an exclusive contract with his company. Yenju is shocked to hear this. Yenduek believes Jia's novel is going to be a jackpot, but Jia is still skeptical and thinks he's full of it. But if Jia wins, she can give him 3 forehead flicks, which is a lethal attack. Soon Jia's first novel was published and she picked up a copy for herself. Jia thought she was just lucky, but she never expected so many people to love her writing. The first edition of the novel sold out, and within a year, 300,000 copies were sold. And just like that, Jia became an author. Meanwhile, Yenju's reading Jia's novel with her dogs out and is in deep thought. She recalls how Jia started writing because she was bored, and now she's a published author. Thinking of this makes Yenju laugh about how Jia being a quote-unquote genius is a joke. This notion is confirmed by her fighting a dog for her book. After recovering her book, Jia gets on a bus and wonders what are the odds someone here is reading her book. Turns out, it's 100% because someone is, and Jia celebrates this miracle. She soon gets back and immediately starts poking Yenju to get her attention. Yenju's confused why Jia's excited, and she explains how seeing someone was reading her book on the bus and laughing while reading, which filled her with pride. Jia then asks what Yenju thinks of her book and if it was any good. Yenju doesn't know what to say, but ultimately decides to lie and says it was really good and interesting. This makes Jia excited, and she hugs Yenju. Jia's relieved because she thought her novel was a total mess, but she asks Yenju again if she's just saying that to make her feel good. Yenju knows that it's a mess, but she grabs Jia's hair and repeats that her novel is actually really good. After recovering her hair, Jia asks how Yenju's meeting with the publisher went. While Yenju's expression implies it didn't go well, she says he liked her writing and even got his business card. Jia is happy for Yenju's success, meaning it's time to celebrate all night with chicken feet and beer. Soon Jia is passed out on the floor, and Yeonjus left to clean up and decided to raw dog it by crushing garbage with her bare foot. She remembers her interaction with Yenduek, who asked her the difference between good and interesting, implying her writing is not good enough. Just thinking of this is enough for her to break the bag in frustration. After this day, Jia's golden age began. She brought Yenju with her on a trip and took a picture next to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. She dropped out of college and had time to do whatever she wanted. She also had more money than she knew what to do with and officially became a god-tier bomb. If Gia was craving pizza, she'd fly to Italy. If she wanted to see a musical, it was on Broadway. She even sent her parents on a cruise. But Gia and Yenju eventually meet Yenduek again, and he asks Gia when her next work is coming out. Gia explains that she's working on it, but she's constantly gets distracted by new ideas. Suddenly, Gia gets a call and excuses herself, leaving Yenju and Yenduek alone. He mentions how this whole situation is cruel because the work Yenju poured thousands of hours into is overshadowed by carefree scribbles. Yenju claims she doesn't know what he's talking about, but her expression says otherwise. Yenduek doesn't want to see this anymore and knows that if Yenju is in the industry long enough, her real talent will eventually come out on top. So he tells Yenju to not compare herself to Gia's immediate success. Sometime later, Gia's hard at work on her next work. The words endlessly poured onto the page to the point where even eating became a distraction and she'd only realize when she's out of breath. But the bigger issue is that Yenju stopped writing completely and opts to lay in bed. The scene shifts to Gia in a meeting with Yenduek, and he claims her next book will sell at least 1 million copies. Gia thinks he's just flattering her, but he's telling the truth. Gia's next book smells like pure profit to Yenduek, and he suggests she turn her novel into a series for each season of the year. Gia's confused, but Yenduek explains that the company is investing everything into her book and is debating whether they want to turn it into a movie. Gia can't believe that's happening, but Yenduek's expression changes and asks if Gia has any concerns, because she looks like she has something on her mind. So Gia explains the current situation with Yenju not writing anymore and wants Yenduek to help her start again. Gia explains that Yenju's biggest wish is to hear that her writing's fun by Yenduek, and Gia believes it is. But Yenduek's unimpressed and asks Gia if she thinks Yenju's writing could truly shine if she just made a few minor edits. Gia confirms this and explains that Yenju's writing can be tedious at times, so a little tweaking could fix it. But Yenduek laughs and says that it's easy for Gia to say because she's a genius. He simply can't see a way to turn Yenju's writing into something engaging, and neither does she. If he knew how to, he would have done it already, so he tells Gia to stop throwing those harsh words around mere mortals like them. This is the first time Gia got a scolding as a novelist, but Yenju is the most talented writer Gia knows. Whenever Gia is stuck, she thinks of what Yenju would write, and she became a successful writer using this process. Gia can't believe Yenju hasn't become a writer yet, and she thinks she knows how to fix it because she has a clear perspective. Gia remembers that Yenju's birthday is next month and wants her to smile again, so Gia gets up and decides to go all out for her birthday. On Yenju's birthday, she's enraged because Gia presented her with a slightly refined version of her novel. All she did was trim the unnecessary parts. But Yenju is pissed off by Gia's audacity and brutally slaps her in the face. Gia's lost for words and doesn't understand why this happened, and she's suddenly filled with anger. But for some reason, Yenju seemed to be suffering much more. Gia explained this to Yenduek, and genuinely doesn't understand why she was so upset, because her intentions were good. After all, hers was better and Yenju still owned the rights, so what's there to be mad about? Suddenly Yenduek pours his coffee into cola and Gia's disgusted. He claims that it tastes better this way and explains this is essentially what Gia did to Yenju's work. So Gia apologizes to Yenju in a handstand and their friendship is restored. But it only got worse as they stopped talking about novels, making their conversation scarce. The next time Gia read Yenju's writing, she saw the same errors she was making before, but forced herself to tell Yenju it was good. Yenju was happy, but at what cost? Soon Yenduek mentioned how Gia's new writing isn't interesting and isn't like her. But what does that even mean? This prompts Gia to have an identity crisis, and she can't write anymore. She used to be someone who could do it easily, but once someone questioned her, she couldn't anymore and drowned in the constant thoughts of how to write properly. Eventually Gia's enthusiasm towards writing faded away, and everything she wrote got rejected. Gia was trying to write something fun like she used to effortlessly do, but she couldn't do it and realized all her accomplishments were purely from luck. She is only left with regret and wonders how it would have turned out if she handled things differently. In the end, Gia could never overcome the slump and abandoned everything and fled back to her hometown. And just like that, Gia's novel that once brought her joy stole everything from her, and her golden age has come to an end. Gia explains to Minchio that after that all she did was make things harder for people around her and disappeared for a few years, and says it's pathetic. Anyway, when you trip over a rock, it hurts. If you roll down the stairs, it hurts even more. But what happens if you fall from the sky? How much more would it hurt? And this is the type of dream Gia used to constantly have. Gia doesn't know how much it would hurt and thinks it's a miracle she's still alive. But Gia remembers a time when she wasn't in pain and wonders if she was right back then to begin with. But Gia's still confused about what really happened back then, but knows it wasn't a dream because of her bank account balance. Gia claims that she's not connected with the people who saw her as successful back then, which is a blatant lie, and thinks making eye contact with them is embarrassing. She believes the contract Mincheol received is tied to the old her, and they're now trying to drag Mincheol into it. Suddenly Mincheol hugs Gia and she starts panicking. It hurts him to hear her story and says it's okay to cry, and while Gia says she doesn't need to and gets defensive, tears start forming and she starts uncontrollably crying while Mincheol embraces her. Gia never learned how to cry when she was young, so that's why she's crying so much now. That night she had the same dream of her falling from the sky and wondered when the pain would end, but Mincheol was there falling with the same face he always has. When asked if he is scared, he says he can't hear her because it's too loud. This time Gia didn't wake up in pain and felt relieved by Mincheol's presence in her dream. This makes her think of what happened yesterday and decides to act like that never happened today. But Mincheol is sitting there smiling while looking at his phone. When Gia asks what he's smiling about, he says it is her novel, and Gia freaks out because it was supposed to be a secret, but it never was. Gia thinks he's referring to their conversation yesterday, but Mincheol says that she's too famous for him not to know, and she reminisces about her time at the top. But Mincheol only knows because Gia's mom spread the news everywhere she went. Gia's mom is a big shot salon owner in the neighborhood, so everyone in the area probably has a copy of her novels. Even though Gia's embarrassed, for some reason she felt incredibly relieved by seeing Mincheol's face while she chased after him. The next morning, Gia wakes up and hears something moving around and thinks someone's robbing them. So she quietly tells Mincheol to wake up, only to find a shirtless Mincheol body pillow lying next to her. She freaks out, but the real Mincheol is there next to her getting ready for work. But Gia's confused because it's 5 a.m. Mincheol has been carpooling to work with his colleagues for quite a while, and it was working well. But as Suyin and Sang-yu got closer, the carpool got awkward and Mincheol was asked to go to work separately from now on. As a result, Mincheol's forced to get ready at 5 a.m. and Gia's outraged to hear this. Mincheol believes that he messed up and explains that he committed the greatest sin of waking Gia up at 5 a.m. with his alarm. But Gia says that's wrong because his two colleagues are in some kind of a relationship and want space. But Mincheol reveals that everyone except Suyin and Sang-yu already know they like each other except them. But Gia is still confused why Mincheol wants to carpool with them. But Mincheol says he needs to get to work somehow, and Gia can't believe how dense he is. He continues by saying it's inconvenient because there's no direct transportation to his office from here, and this prompts Gia to become a gangster and shakes down Mincheol by asking how much money he has. She directs him to make sure to thank them for letting him carpool for so long, and he gives Sang-yu a gift the next day. The next stage is serious, so Gia transforms into a professional businesswoman. Mincheol can't simply buy a car on a whim and needs to carefully consider the details like the type and insurance. Gia's carefully considering what a Jack 32-year-old should drive. But she turns her head and sees that Mincheol has turned into a K-drama protagonist, and she starts sweating and asks why he's staring so much. He's doing this because Gia is so cool right now, and she's embarrassed by the praise. But she soon finishes and presents Mincheol with his options. He's impressed she knows so much, and she reveals that she learned all this back when she was a novelist because she wanted to buy a car, but didn't because the maintenance costs were too high. Regardless, Gia urges Mincheol to pick, but he mentions that she forgot the most important factor. Mincheol doesn't have his license yet, and Gia's brain short-circuits. There's an old saying that says if you want to see a person's true nature, let them drive. But Mincheol's instincts Gia witnessed were unhinged as he hit the shirtless Mincheol body pillow without batting an eye. This situation started 2 weeks ago, where Mincheol explained that he doesn't have his license to save money by taking public transportation to work. Gia knows he's just coping, but he doubles down and claims that waking up at 5 a.m. to go to work is the optimal solution, and even considers sleeping in separate rooms to make it work. But Gia doesn't want to sleep alone because her room is filled with quote-unquote stuff, and she'll be cold if she sleeps alone. So Mincheol hugs her and asks if she'll be lonely if she sleeps alone. But Gia's done with his nonsense and enrolls him in driving school. The process starts with a written test, which Mincheol easily passes. He also passed the driving skills test, and Gia assumed he would easily pass the road test, but he failed. Mincheol failed a second time, claiming it was because someone cut him off. But when he failed a third time, Gia knew something was wrong. so she sets out to ensure he passes next time and goes to a good practice spot her mom knows. Mincheol starts out driving fine, but Jia suddenly flies to the other side of the car because Mincheol failed to park properly. This is why he failed, and he claims it's because it's hard to judge the distance everything is with the mirrors, so he misses. Jia suggests he try going slow, but Mincheol says he will lose points and thinks just going at full speed is the solution. Jia needs to break this bad habit fast and comes up with the genius solution. She pulls out the Mincheol body pillow taped to a box and tells him to act like that's a person. But after 30 minutes, the body pillow is unrecognizable, and Jia mourns the tragic loss of Mincheol number 2. Since they aren't making progress, Jia decides to stand in the parking spot and not move, so Mincheol is forced to be more careful. He tries to talk her out of it, but she refuses to move because she knows it's impossible to be hit by truck con twice. Fast forward to the road test. The instructor's impressed with Mincheol's improvement, and he says his wife helped him. The instructor assumed it must have been tough since they probably fought about it, but they didn't. Normally couples fight because teaching someone to drive is frustrating, and he thinks Mincheol is very lucky to have Jia. After the test, Mincheol indicates that he passed and they high-five in celebration. The scene shifts to an alarm going off and Jia wakes up, but she doesn't want to go to work. She starts her day by getting ready and admiring herself in the mirror. After fixing her hair, she steps into the living room to find a black beast stretching to start their day. But why is Jia referring to Mincheol as a black beast when he isn't black? During the crisis of the Red Devil incident where Jia threw away all Mincheol's red shirts, she thought she didn't need to throw away his black shirts, but they've been piling up. Regardless, Mincheol says good morning, which apparently caught Jia off guard, but she awkwardly says good morning, to which Mincheol high-fives her without hesitation. Ever since that time on the island, high-fives have become their routine, but the reality is that Mincheol one day figured out that Jia likes high-fives and can't stop. Anyway, the next part of their morning is Mincheol leaving to wash up, leaving Jia to solve the greatest problem of human history, figuring out what to eat. This sounds simple, but it's actually challenging, and if they don't decide on a menu, Mincheol will eat the same tasteless healthy food every day. So it's necessary for Jia to prepare meals with flavor, and decides they will have seaweed soup this morning. But it wasn't Jia who decided this. It was the brilliant invention of the seaweed soup packet, which is convenient for small households like theirs. Jia was able to easily make a balanced Korean meal of seaweed soup and eggs and only $2 of side dishes. Jia's excited to eat, but Mincheol's intimidated by a meal that doesn't contain boiled chicken breast. But after Jia threatened to eat his portion, Mincheol quickly came to the table. It turns out, Mincheol likes the side dishes more than Jia expected. Previously it felt like he was eating to just get it over with, but Mincheol has discovered the wonders of modern Korean cuisine and compliments Jia's cooking even though he's eating the pre-made side dish from the convenience store. As they chat, Jia wonders if Mincheol is really human after all, but suddenly, she gets a notification on her phone saying today is Mincheol's birthday. She can't believe it because Mincheol seems to not care. At the cafe, Jia mentioned this to Nari and she's outraged and can't believe Jia would do this to her Chad husband. So Nari says there's only one way to fix this and she needs to make tonight an unforgettable event even if it causes lifelong trauma. Jia's hesitant, but Siu agrees with Nari and they successfully peer pressure Jia into believing it. So Nari, the resident fanfic expert with 23 years of experience, has a plan Jia can use and comes back wearing a bow saying the gift is her. But Jia's unimpressed and thinks doing that would only leave a bad memory. But Nari doubles down on how effective it is because of how much Siu is blushing right now. Suddenly Yenju appears and enters their conversation. Jia explains that she wants this to be special and something only she can do. So Yenju suggests Jia do something she's good at, like writing. Jia tries to avoid eye contact from Nari to deny the allegations, but she asks Jia about her writing and her shocked reaction tells Nari everything she needs to know. Later at the gym, Mincheol's calmly doing bicep curls, but Jia looks like she just got out of the trenches and claims it's because work at the cafe was stressful today. So Mincheol suggests they do cardio to re-energize, and Jia declines. At home, Jia lays in bed and wonders if she's overthinking this because she accomplished nothing other than getting the cake. She thinks the other suggestions were nonsense and wants it to be meaningful, so she decides to write something because she was once an entity that was a professional writer. Jia starts on her laptop, but feels like that isn't sincere enough, so she takes out a pen and paper and it starts to come out pretty good. So she rereads it but realizes she wrote a 17th century English love letter and scraps it. Jia gives up because she's no longer a writer, so she decides to put down what really matters in the letter. Gia enters Minchul's gaming room and hands him a letter for his birthday celebration and tells him he better not be disappointed because she worked very hard on it. Minchul immediately almost rips the card in half, but Gia stops him and he eventually opens it properly to find a lipstick kiss mark inside. Minchul's incredibly moved by this, but he doesn't actually know what it means. Gia explains that it's her heart and Minchul's still confused, but that doesn't matter and she drags him into the living room for the cake. But Minchul's concerned because cake is a high-calorie food that has lots of fat and will make him lose all his gains. This makes Minchul ask if Gia is trying to plump him up to eat him later. But it's not like that and she reveals the protein cake she made. It's full of healthy ingredients, so Minchul has to eat it all. Seeing Gia's expression makes him agree and he asks how she came up with this in the first place. Gia reveals that she found this recipe online because she knew he wouldn't eat a regular cake and didn't want to force him, so she wanted to do something for him that he would actually enjoy, but her hopes aren't high. But Minchul's happy because Gia did all this just for him. After eating, Gia asks if Minchul remembers when they were on the beach and how she mentioned that she wanted to do something when they got back. He remembers and she says she wants to have a special experience. Back on the island, Gia was struggling but she actually enjoyed it because she was with the person she loves, but she shut herself off from him because she was frustrated. So Gia wants to make up for it by spending more time together. Minchul assumes she means they get stranded on a deserted island again. But Gia just wants to do things as a couple like go on dates because they don't do that often even though they live together. In short, she wants to make more memories with the person she loves, but thinks it's embarrassing to say. But Minchul agrees and says they should do it and immediately starts planning to take trips on the weekend and taking vacations abroad together. Gia's concerned this might make Minchul lose his gains, but he says skipping a few days on his diet is fine because he can simply work out more and then leans in for a kiss. Gia gets embarrassed and asks what he's doing, and he explains that they're about to have a special experience tonight. The scene shifts to Yenju's apartment where Yendu's reading her latest work and praises it for being so good. But when Yenju asks if it's as good as Gia's work, all Yendu can do is yawn and asks what kind of writing Gia did again as if he doesn't remember because it's been so long. But Yenju knows it's all a lie because out of the hundreds of works he's seen, he personally chose Gia's. Yendu still claims to not know, but Yenju just gives him her new email and says she'll be expecting a real answer soon. Yendu now in his car and thinks that how his lifespan decreases every time he meets with Yenju. At the cafe after it is closed, Gia sneezes because someone's talking about her and Nari complains that she's peeking at her writing. Gia denies it but Nari knows she's lying. She's also curious why Siu's writing so much and he reveals that he's just copying stuff online. The reason they're writing is because Yenju bought new rare coffee beans they'll be using in the cafe. Nari thinks it tastes amazing but Gia's unimpressed. Their task is to write a description and caption for the new beans for the cafe's social media and the winner receives 1 million won and everyone's forced to participate. Gia wonders if the cafe has these contests often and Nari says they do occasionally. The last one was for the flavor of a fish-shaped bun, and Gia begs to know who won. Nari nonchalantly says it was her. In reality, this is more like a benefit of the job rather than a contest, and they just go with it because Yenju's a writer. Nari then accuses Gia of being an amazing writer, and while she denies it, Nari conspires with Siu saying that Gia is here to steal their bonus. So to prove it, Nari demands to see the letter Gia wrote for Minchul, but she can't show that because it's too embarrassing. So Gia claims to not remember, but Nari demands to see it and this continues for some time. Yenju's now reading their submissions and she finds Nari's submission cute because it's more about Yenju being out of control rather than the coffee. Siu wrote about the good points of the coffee, but it's unnecessarily long. Yenju's eager to know what Gia wrote and she laughs at her submission and is impressed. Gia wrote that the new beans taste exactly the same as the old ones, which is correct because there is only a subtle difference. Yenju's wondering if this was effortless for her while Gia is emoting on her with Minchul in their house about what happened today. Back at the cafe, a kid is showing Gia a picture of her from the desert island and she's very irritated and politely denies it's her. When Gia was young, she once appeared on TV and this was enough to make the entire neighborhood proud. As a kid, she thrived off receiving attention, so whenever she saw a camera, she would always try to be involved. Gia once wanted attention, but she doesn't anymore, so she wants the video of her on the deserted island to be deleted. But Yenduek asks her to take some more time to think about it because his company is trying to film deserted island survival Mr. Beast videos. The video also has a lot of attention, so Jia should be making good money off it. But Jia says she hasn't made a single cent off it. So Yenduek suggests she check her old account from when she was an author, and there are too many zeros to count. Jia wonders if this is a mistake, but Yenduek explains this is only natural because she's basically famous now. Jia decides to let the video stay up, and Yenduek calls the iced hot Americano lady and tells her that the master plan worked. But Jia still doesn't want to appear in videos online or want media exposure. So Yenduek needs to follow through with the next phase in their plan. Anyway, Jia's always been lucky. She once got a big coupon from a delivery app event, and another time the restaurant messed up her order and sent her a more expensive dish that perfectly suited her tastes. And now the unexpected interview she was in is bringing in a lot of money. When she mentions this to Mincheol, he's confused but is shocked by the amount she received and wonders if they won the lottery. This was only possible because Jia is part of an agency and she's proud of her success. But the agency wants to know if Mincheol would make guest appearances in their shows for a generous fee, and after some intense thought, he declines. Jia's confused why, but he explains that he's just an ordinary person, and this is the end of chapter 104. Please continue at chapter 105 or wait until the next part. Please like and subscribe to support the channel, and see you next time.